Welcome, everybody. We're back for another I'm Not GM Speed Chess Championship match. I'm Grandmaster Robert Hess. Alongside me is my good friend, Grandmaster Amon Hamilton. Amon, we have a great matchup ahead, don't we?
Yeah, this is going to be an exciting one, Robert. Two people that I think potentially the community on Twitch here are not as familiar with, but for chess players and professionals alike, or anyone following the over-the-board classical chess scene, these names should not be too unfamiliar, especially one of the names who, in the last edition of this exact event, Robert, made it quite far and almost took down the whole thing.
Yeah, she's very used to this format, and we'll remind everybody of what that is. It is a single elimination bracket, and there are three separate time controls. The longest time control is 5 minutes plus a 1 second increment. It's followed by 3 minutes plus 1 second increment. And finally, we get 25 minutes of bullet chess at 1+1. And of course, you advance to the next round where the prize money increases. And Alina Kashlinskaya, as Amon was just alluding to, she made it to the final last year where she was defeated by John Bartholomew, who is not taking part this year, which may clear the path for her way to a championship run. But of course, she must get through this very tough challenge in round one. She is the 14 seed, taking on number 3, Lars Hauge. So, Amon, in this matchup here between two very strong competitors, who do you give the favorite? Do you give the seed favorite or the repeating player in Alina Kashlinskaya?
Well, the interesting thing about this matchup, and I just want to point out that I feel like Alina is consistently getting undersold in these tournaments. If you think back to the I Am Not a GM last edition, I think she was, I want to say almost like the last seed in terms of favorite to win, and she made it all the way to the finals and gave an insane performance, by the way. So just I think it's someone not to bet against. I think Alina has proven herself in all formats. People were even saying, oh, maybe she'll be impressive in the blitz, in the longer time controls, but there's no way she holds her own in bullet. Absolutely incorrect. So if I've learned one thing, it's not to bet against Alina for no apparent reason. So be very careful there. She's incredibly, incredibly talented. And the bullet portion, I was especially impressed with by her. So Lars, I know a little bit less about in terms of online play, but Robert, you and I were discussing some of the ratings that he's boasting online right now, and they sort of speak for themselves.
Yeah, he's 2,800 in bullet, and you were just referring to the fact that, hey, Alina, she was thought to be the underdog in the bullet, but that 1 second increment can make a world of difference, and we are off. Lars gets the white piece in the first game, and we have my absolute favorite opening, yours too, Amon, the French.
Wow, what a place to start, Robert. It's like they know. It's like they know. Wow.
And Alina does usually come quite well prepared. And in this case, we have the winner where you see the situation, the bishop on b4 pins the knight on c3. And now Lars says, here, take my knight. I get the bishop pair. And there will be open space to work with. But how about those double pawns, Amon? You have a lot of experience playing the French.
Yeah, I was actually wondering whether we would see c5 because it's, I guess, the more topical line right now, more of a main line. But the knight e7 move order does give you the option to play b6 here and go for bishop a6, which I thought was her intention. It's often why black inserts knight e7 first. But no, we're going back to c5, and maybe some of the chat would be a little more familiar with some of those lines where the white queen gets down there and ends up taking all the kingside pawns in exchange for black, ruining all the queenside pawns over here. So we haven't quite got that. Instead, it's the H pawn, Robert, just throwing itself up the board. These guys are neglecting piece development.
Yeah, and I like what Alina did as a response, because if white were able to push that pawn to h6, then the dark squares become very vulnerable around the black king side. And guess what? Only white has the dark square bishop. So instead, Alina, she played h6. And now after bishop b5 check, bishop d7, look at this move a6. It's clear Alina wants to use Amon's idea, bishop to b5, try to trade those bishops, but not so fast when your pawn on g7 is under attack.
Yeah, and this move bishop b5, it might not look like much by white, but if you play bishop d3 right away, bishop a6 would follow. So bishop b5, you want to lure the bishop to the d7 square and then go back and say, look, well, now you don't have bishop a6 and you have to waste a move, quote unquote, waste a move with a6 in order to complete that idea.
Completely agreed. And when you play a move like a6, you look at the b6 square next to it, it becomes a little more vulnerable because a pawn's best friend is another pawn. So black, very likely, after c4, will try to advance some pawns on the queen side, but we'll see if that's enough for Alina to actually kind of unleash her pieces, because right now, look at that bishop on d7 in particular. That is a French bishop, if I've ever seen one, stuck behind a wall of pawns.
Yeah, that's a that's a tough wall to be behind, but it is par for the course in these kind of positions. I have to say, like, I always look at these positions and think white is doing so well because this G pawn is going to get up there at some point. Queen F4, G4, but black sometimes puts this bishop. I was going to say it puts this bishop on A4, and it looks like a funny move, but hits that pawn on C2, stops white from playing A4, which would be a dream to get that bishop on A3 on that long diagonal. And slowly but surely, B5, A5, B4 might happen in the future.
And I'm currently wondering, he was rook a2, and I think that may have been a bit too defensive. I'm looking at knight h4, and I'm trying to dislodge this knight from f5 to win the g7 pawn. But now it's a move too slow, because if you play knight h4, I have knight c6 to e7, so I can reinforce the knight f5. That's exactly what Alina does. I think that she has a pretty dream position with the superior pawn structure, and now the stable knight on f5.
Absolutely. And now if you exchange, of course, the other knight is going to appear there. And if you ever move the queen and play g4 to kick the knight out, keep in mind that there's no way there'll still be an attack on g7. So Alina has sort of stabilized. This king probably either going to walk to the queen side or even long castle, but both look pretty safe behind this impressive wall of pawns here.
And I think going forward, who has the advantage? It's probably about level. I see the evaluation bar on screen says, well, zeros, which that doesn't mean anything. This isn't a dead draw. There's plenty of life left, but it'll be dictated by who controls the pawn breaks. And we've been talking about b5, a5, maybe a b4 break for black on the queen side. Perhaps white will move that queen, but like we just have seen, in g4, f4, and maybe f or g5. It's a very complex position full of rich ideas, and it's closed for now, but don't be surprised when this whole board opens up.
Definitely. Yeah, we're going to see the pawns move up the board. Remember, white has the bishop pair. Whenever you have the bishops, you got to try to open things up. So whether it's g4, g5, whether it's g4, f4, f5, something has to give here. And Lars Hauge has a rook tied down on the queen side, but otherwise his prospects on the king side look pretty good here.
Yeah, and I like your plan, though, Amon. Castle queenside, because black can also play on the king side with her pawn. She can strike back with the time the f6 or g6 when the moment feels right, but she instead goes queen b5. And is queen b1 a big threat here, hitting the rook and the bishop?
Absolutely think so. Queen b1 is a hilarious move, getting behind enemy lines. Even if you played queen b1 and rook b2 happened, you can even go to a1 and just sort of hang out there for the moment, which would be nuts. But castles by white, and I was wondering what was going to happen after rook b2. Like, is she going to go queen a5 then?
She might, but I feel like your kind of tone there suggested you don't like the queen sitting on a5. It's far away from the rest of the board. So I wonder if she thought she could play queen to b1, and she would have been able to had that pawn been on a7 rather than on a6, because the queen needs to stay in touch with the pawn on b6, and thus couldn't use your idea with queen b1, queen a1 without dropping that pawn.
Yeah, and now that I guess the idea queen b5 didn't work out for black, what I see is that that's just been a massive waste of time. And white's gotten castled, kicked the queen out with the rook, gotten f5 in, f6 is the next idea if it can happen. And I think Lars has opened up what could be a pretty significant advantage here, unless Alina reacts pretty aggressively right now, because the move f6, Robert, I feel like if white gets that in, you may as well resign.
Well, you say if white gets that in, I agree with you, then black is just strategic. Also, why shouldn't black play f6? There it is, because white has castle kingside. Even if it costs you a pawn, breaking open the king side was a king on g1, and that king could be susceptible to a counterattack. I like this move f6 a lot. As Amon was highlighting, if white played it, there's just destruction down the f-file. Instead, the board can blow open at any moment, and we'll see to whose advantage that is. Bishops tend to thrive with an open board, right? But the king is over there, so that's the trade-off.
Yeah, and keep in mind that when things start to open up on the king side, potentially Alina is going to be the one with more firepower over there, because this rook is tethered to the c2 pawn and isn't doing anything on the b file. So it's basically just kind of stuck on the queen side. Now you could say the bishop is stuck as well, but from black's perspective, you're kind of putting 3 points over there and tying down 5 points if you think of it mathematically. So that could be something good for Alina as things open up, but I'm always concerned about what the bishops can do in an open position.
Completely with you there. And I will add that I think for many people in our audience, rook f1 to b1 would make sense because you're doubling rooks and hitting the b6 pawn. But note that black has a very easy response in b6 to b5, putting the pawn on a square defended by another pawn and that bishop and the queen. So I'm just saying, hey, you attacked me, I simply defended. Now your rooks are useless over there. So the rook on b2, as Aman was highlighting, that doesn't want to be there. It would much prefer to be on f2 over on the king side. But that journey would drop the c2 pawn, so not happening anytime soon.
Right. Queen d7 played here. And I mean, I think that Lars could sort of approach this position a bit slowly. It's not like anybody has to take the pawns in the current position. There's a lot of tension. And what I see at some of the lower levels, Robert, is as soon as there's tension, it's gone. So it's there for a move. And as soon as you can take something, it's so tempting to just relieve that tension and make things easier to calculate. But oftentimes keeping the tension is how you build things up. So right now we can see neither player willing to bite, because if white takes on e6, black is happy to take back with the queen, and all of a sudden the queen is pinning that g pawn, putting pressure on e5, more centralized. So neither player is looking to give any ground here.
No, indeed not. And it's a really good lesson in when you should capture, when you should leave the tension as it is. And look at this. Now that the rook went to f8, the pawn on f6 was captured. But I'm still looking at this, and it was smart of Lars to put the king on h1, but shouldn't black just now play f5 and continue breaking open more lines in front of the white king? This rook on b2 is the biggest problem on the board, because all of black's pieces can come to the king side for the attack, and this rook on b2 is a bystander on the queen side, and endgames will also be problematic for white because of this double pawns on c3 and c2.
Yeah, love this move though. Queen g3, sort of inviting the move f4. And f4 closes off that diagonal, but it also, strangely enough, it keeps things closed on the king side, which might be exactly what Lars needs. Just a little bit of time to regroup his pieces. Maybe he brings the queen back, defends c2, and then suddenly he can reroute that rook over to the open e file.
That's a great idea, right? Queen to g2, hits d5, brings the rook back around. And I like what Alina is doing. Instead of playing f4, and speaking of tension, that would remove the tension of these pawns over there on the f and g files. She's keeping that tension alive, protects her c7 with the rook. She needs to keep up the rook on f8 where it is, because the b8 square, that queen and bishop battery can be quite powerful. And look at this, a queen trade being offered. And if you're Alina, do you take there? Because I feel like I don't want to get into the endgame.
Well, there's a few things to keep in mind. Like, there's almost rook sacrifices that work. Both of these rooks are on full-time duty protecting c7 and b8. So she plays the more, I guess, aggressive move, queen h4. This is really going to enter some tactical waters here. The rook is being defended by the queen, and everything's barely under control here.
She hung b6. Oh my. Whoa, you see her shake her head. She's like, oops, forgot about that pawn. And that's that rook on b2. It wasn't doing anything for so long, and then you drop an important pawn in front of your king.
Yeah, earlier you were like, guys, I know some of the low-rated people in the chat might suggest just attacking the pawn, but there's an easy defense. And queen takes a6, rook a7.
Wait, did you see the evaluation bar? It just went much lower because it... Wait, what is happening here?
Hang on a sec. Because I think the move, by the way, was rook takes e7.
Yes.
And then there was queen a6 and bishop takes d5. So
Removing
that's what was missed.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the time, 2 seconds. There's only +1 in this game. And
Ruby's mate! Ruby's mate! Oh my gosh, it's mate and 1 on the board! Lose on time! Oh my good. He forgot about his clock too.
2 seconds is by the time your opponent moves and the game, it's suddenly your turn. For you to process their move, think of your move, decide on your move, and execute your move, that's a lot more than 2 seconds for most people.
Oh my gosh, we should pull up that just to show the final position. There was checkmate in 1 available on the board with rook all the way down to b8 checkmate.
And look at that, 18 seconds spent on rook takes f3. And it's almost like you just don't calculate that move at all. And then you would never expect a blunder of mate in 1. That's a long way to go for the mouse there, Robert.
As somebody who loses on time very regularly in my blitz games, I get it. And actually, perhaps rook takes f3 was a brilliant choice by Alina in a position where her king is in trouble no matter what. No easy moves for Lars, and checkmate in 1, of course, is the best move, but hard to accomplish. But as we get to this second game here, I mean, many missed tactics from both sides. As you're just pointing out, this checkmate
Yeah,
in the
showing
center.
that
But
rook takes e7 from earlier, but I think we chalk up that entire game down to, just round one. That's what you get in round one, Robert. Nobody was comfortable there. It's funny to see the reactions. I was actually looking at the webcams of the two players after that mate in one miss, and we saw Lars, who actually didn't get to play it and flagged. He was laughing. He thought that was pretty funny. Like he seemed in good spirits, and Alina was stone faced, like
yep,
just yeah, that's a win for me. Let's go next game.
Alina is all about that serious business in this tournament. I mean, last
Oh yeah,
year, she's very friendly. She's
yeah,
a great person, but she takes this seriously and she wants to beat every single opponent that is in front of her. She is a professional in the truest definition of the word, excuse me. So now we get into the game two. She's up a pawn because of the opening. It was a Benko gambit named after Pal Benko. He played this where you get a lot of play for your sacrifice pawn. But I don't think this is the ideal setup for Lars because, well, where are you actually getting that play? E4 is defended. A4 is your extra pawn, and that's a pass pawn. I don't see the typical weaknesses that black can target, so I'm not sure I really would enjoy this position from Lars's point of view, especially being down a point in the match. Maybe you feel some pressure to win immediately.
yeah. Well, first of all, I think that the idea is mainly d5. Like when black plays e6 like this in the Benko and allows white to take, he's pretty much got to get the move d5 in at some point. And if he doesn't, I think it's just problematic. Usually what I'm used to is black actually plays like rook a6 and gets the queen over to that diagonal, and that helps a lot with d5. But the way that this has happened, I just feel like Alina has gotten a good version of maybe a theoretical line that I'm familiar with. So I think she should be happy here. Remember, these are 5-minute games, so lots and lots of time to dissect this position. What happens after h6, knight takes e6, c4 is my first question.
There could be some kind of knight d4 type of move where you continue running the knight around, but then I see queen c5, and those are the type of things where your knight's hanging in the center of the board. So h6 actually is a good move, and I don't think knight takes e6 is possible. So you'd have to drop your knight back. But let me ask you something. Is h6 inducing more weaknesses, and so that's one of the reasons she went for it? Or do you think she just overlooked h6, and now Lars has to find it?
I think she overlooked it, but I think it's the type of move you overlook where you're not that upset. And he does play it. I think she goes back pretty quickly here, realizes, look, this is just not playable. And she's not going to be too unhappy going back because she sees that there are those weaknesses you talked about.
Yeah, and it's one of these positions, I would say, where you sort of trust your opponent. H6 could be a huge blunder, but knight takes e6, you then see c4. I think she's very well aware that this is not going to work out, so she's quickly going to dismiss that. Now she's trying to figure out, should my knight go to h3, where it defends my pawn on f2, or should I just go back to f3 where it came from? But now there could be some issues down the f file. So she does choose the retreating square that she came from, but I could see why you would start considering your options at that point.
Right. And knight g4 chosen, so a bit of a different route. It looks like there won't be d5 anymore. It's more going to be like a knight to e5 type of game. Rook takes f3 is tempting, but I think knight e5, maybe try to sink that knight on d3 with c4. Hitting the f2 pawn is the way to go here.
How about the other knight to e5? Because that way you could maybe throw in a rook takes f2 check. I mean, I don't know if that will work, but knight takes e5, rook f2 check does look very appealing to me. Yeah.
That's fantastic because now it takes king g1, and Alina wants to say, look, no matter how you take that back, your rook is loose there. I mean, what's going on here?
Yeah, so she can take with the he's gonna take with the bishop, and then she can take the knight on g4, but then her bishop on d2 falls here. So it's really messy, but black has to be happy about this with a very strong bishop, and the white king on g1 is in serious danger.
Because I would have said on the last move when the bishop was hit and the knight was hit, like if you just move the bishop there, something like, I don't know, bishop f4 or somewhere, then the knight's being hit and you can't move it because the rook on f2. But this just looks winning for black.
Yeah, the evaluation bar, I just saw it sink, and it's saying just completely winning for black. And you still have to put these games away. And
Absolutely.
I just don't see any way for black to go wrong, unless you somehow hang up your g6 pawn. If I don't know how that would even happen, but it feels like it's just too easy at this point for black to play. So there's no concern for Lars whatsoever, and he will even this match up at one game apiece.
Yeah, it's really looking like that, but we've seen in the last game where it came down to a mate in one, right? Where he wasn't able to convert it just because of the time. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed that doesn't happen to him again. But rook endgame, this is looking really, really promising for him.
Yes, because it's essentially the three extra pawns in the center for that one pass. Rook f6 now. I didn't actually like the decision to go in the end game, and this is exactly why. Your rook is tied down to the a pawn. Now your pawns on the sixth rank. There are four of them there, and that lonely rook on f6 is going to start chopping them off.
Yeah, so I like the move rook e2. The engine gave some crazy rook af1 move, but other than that move, taking on g6 is logical, and I think black is kind of back in the driver's seat. Like, this pawn can get to a7, but this rook can't really help out. It's hard to make that guy queen.
Yeah, and now this rook goes to c7, so black's pawns are kind of stopped, and white has the more active rook. So rook behind a passed pawn is excellent, and now that pawn can even go to a7, where the rook on c7 does double duty of stopping black's passed pawn and protecting white's passed pawn, freeing up the a1 rook. Although the king on h1, there are back rank checkmate possibilities. Perhaps that rook, if it does leave the first rank, then black will then counter to try to checkmate white.
Yep, because basically after rook a7, I mean, you're always thinking about rook b1 and rook b8 after that, but this seems difficult for white because I feel like when you move that rook, there's always rook a2.
Yeah, that's true as well. And that way you can get your rook behind the pawn and stop it. So what does white really need here? I'm trying to think which pawns you need to pick off to have a chance to hold this. The e6 pawn feels like an important one to get. So rook e1, and after rook a2, maybe rook c6, just double up on that e6 pawn and try to win it. But even if you get that one, it's still plenty of
well, the nice thing is that if you can orchestrate that, you take with the rook from the first rank, and then if king g5, you have rook g6 mate. So the king has to go back, and then maybe you can try checking forever or something like that.
That's a really good point, because king g5 here would be a great move, but white can play rook g7 check, and then the king would have to go back to f6. So your idea about that king being in a sort of net played a big role in that position, and that's why Lars puts his king on e5, and then his king go to d4, where it's safe and sound, surrounded by these pawns that help shield the king.
Yeah, and keep in mind, sometimes if you're not careful, this king might go to e4 and f3 and almost go for some checkmate ideas against the king on h1. This king, Alina's king, like if it was more in the game or if these pawns were not doubled, they would change the position entirely. But these pawns on the g file pretty much don't exist, and the king, as she finally brings it into the action, is just so far away. Black's basically playing with an extra attacker.
That's right. And here, your idea of rook a2 speaks to me. Just get your rook behind the pawn to force white into defensive posturing. You need to defend that pawn. She plays c3 first, but now rook e6 to c6.
Yeah.
And now both sides are struggling to...
Rook b3 or what?
But then you go rook b3. Now you're in like a passive setup. Maybe rook takes h6 is possible. I took away your ability to play pawn to c2. And then I can run my g pawn up the board.
I would be worried about this king d3, d4 connecting, but yeah, I mean, I guess you just got to trust it and just go for it. The g pawn, the a pawn, this is going to be wild.
And I like the rook on b2, keeping the white king on the first rank. And I thought that maybe you could try to get that other rook in for a checkmate. I guess there was never time to make that work. And here, how do you deal with this? You're right, though. That pawn
it just
d4
feels to me like black should win this game. We always learn in chess that two connected pass pawns always beat the split pass pawns.
Yeah, and you're right. The split pawns are good in king and pawn endgames because the king can sit in front of connected pawns and stop them, whereas the split pawns, the king can't get both at the same time. It's like bowling. And here, the rook on a3, it's winning the a7 pawn by force. The c3 pawn is defended by the pawn on d4. Once a7 falls, that's very easy. It's not even split pawns anymore. It's just your double pawns in the g file.
Yeah.
Very past connected pawns.
Yeah, and this doesn't look promising. The a pawn's going to drop. You can trade a pair of rooks, chuck your rook in front of the pawn if necessary, and the king and the pawns just march up the board. So I think just trade the rooks. And
we're only 2 games in, and it's too early to make any kind of big claims. But what I will say is from these 2 games, Lars has been more tactically alert than Alina has. And in the first game, Alina just dropped that b6 pawn, right? It was under attack. Right. She just didn't see it. She's like, what's wrong with me? How did I miss that? Of course, I'm too strong to fall for that. And Lars was able to pick that off. And in this game, he found knight d7 to e5, taking on f2 and all that stuff. So I feel like thus far, Alina, she needs to be a bit more cautious in these tactical positions. And I hope she's not getting down on herself because it's just 2 games. In 2 games of blitz, we all make plenty of mistakes.
Just getting started here. Obviously, the first game's a little bit of the the jitters there. Rook a7, little trick at the end. But yeah, just rook g8 is going to be, that's going to be it. So we have a tied match, 1-1. And so far, I think we're in for a treat in this match, Robert, as the opening for the second game already switched up. He didn't want any part of that French, at least for now.
Yeah, I think that's really cool when you get these matches and every game is different, because sometimes you see great theoretical discussions and battles, but then as commentators, kind of, can we get a new position just so we can be as shocked as everybody else? So here, this knight on d2, this kind of variation says, instead of the Jabawa London type of thing with knight c3, white can still play pawn to c4, and Alina takes towards the center, but that also means that her castling kingside will be more difficult for black because the king will lack one of its shields, right? Pawns in front of a king help defend it. Here, that pawn is towards the center, but an open g-file could spell trouble if the king decided to venture that way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always that decision. Do you take with the e-pawn or the g-pawn? And this entire opening that Lars has played here, the Trompowsky, is designed to quickly take that knight on f6 and force black to make this kind of uncomfortable decision. So long-term, positionally speaking, that h-pawn is loose. And I'm not so sure about the move e4 or even the move c4, to be quite frank, because this d-pawn to me always is going to require some attention. And, you know, that dark square bishop is in Alina's possession, and there's nothing to match it from white's position.
In some ways, it's hard to hold yourself back, but I'm completely with you. And as you know, we've seen many Queen's Gambit accepted types of positions where you want to play e4 and take firm control over the center, but then your pawn on d4 doesn't have its best friend on e3 protecting it. You don't get to build that pawn chain. So that's why we're saying e4 may have been a little bit too much, too helpful for black to put permanent pressure along the d file. And well, how to go from here? f5 comes to my mind. I have double pawns. I don't like my double pawns. Maybe I'll try to just hammer at your center. And I guess bishop h6. I have a bishop move. I don't have to play e6 and develop on that diagonal. Let me use the diagonal I currently have and get my bishop out that way.
Yeah, it's got such a funny move, bishop h6. It's like, imagine you take this pawn back and they go bishop takes d2. It's like every piece that you could take on d2 with blunders one of these central pawns, it seems.
Right. And I think that clearly evidences the big drawback of playing e4 rather than e3 is that some pieces are, she plays bishop h6.
There it is.
They need to defend these two pawns, and the knight on d2 is protecting e4. If you replace that knight on d2 with the other knight to keep e4 defended, you drop d4. That's Amon's essential point here. And I like black's position. I think it's just much more confusing to play this from white's perspective.
Yeah, I think at this point you start getting concerned that you're not going to get that pawn back, and maybe you decide to go queen a4 check. Just take that back, say, okay, look, let's even the material before we go any further, and then look to just go bishop e2 and castle. But gotta like these two bishops, as you know, a lot of pressure on the center. That knight is going to get developed either to c6 or c6 knight d7, and kingside castling for black. Even though there's a g takes f6 played in this position, I think it's fairly safe.
I'm with you now. I was mentioning how you sometimes struggle to castle kingside when you move the pawn from that side of the board, but with your bishops there, good luck attacking the black king. And especially because the central pawns are weak. Oftentimes, if you're getting attacked, you can try to counter in the center of the board, distract your opponent's forces, and that's clearly what's happening right now. And Lars is almost a minute behind at this point. Alina, this is, for both of them, it's not a position they could have expected. This is pretty new territory. And I just feel like it's easier to play with the bishop pair at this point.
Yeah, and I was going to mention one idea, h4, to like trap the bishop. There's always this move bishop d2 to get out of it. And what he's done is he's just given up that pawn that we were talking about in the center, and he's looking to play from here. I can't say that this looks good at all. I mean, knight c6, you got all the dark squares, and now Alina could say, look, I'm going to castle queenside. I don't even need to deal with a potential attack over here.
I'm with you, partner. And it's kind of funny. I forgot that one of the most important roles in this position was the bishop on g6 defending f7, because typically the queen goes to b3 with a double attack on b7 and f7, but f7 was already defended. So queen b3 only attacked one pawn. That was easy to defend.
Perfect. And we see kingside castling. I think because if black castles queenside, at least Lars is kind of happy to see an imbalance in the position. At least he can throw his pawns up there. But knight e5, hitting the bishop. Again, watching that f7 square is just a tender square in the position. And I mean, it's looking better and better for Alina, as she's basically collected an absolutely and totally free pawn in the opening.
Yeah, and I think Black's next two moves might be castle queenside, which attacks the knight on d2, and that rook on h8 can come to g8. And I was talking about how that open file can help White in attack if Black castles that way. But because Black is castling in the other direction, she can use her rook to go to g8 and put some immediate pressure on White's king. And this just looks overwhelmingly good for Alina Kashlinskaya here.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably castle first and then play queen d3. I was a big fan of. But queen d3, exact same idea. Why wouldn't you want to trade queens? I mean, like you're up a pawn. Just we've all learned that one of the easiest ways to convert, whenever you're up material, simply trade.
Yep. And
Simply trade.
The one thing that White could potentially use, the C file, no, there's a knight on d3 saying no c1 square for you. And this is very, very good for Alina. But I will say these are the types of positions that frustrate me sometimes, where I know I should, with best play, be close to winning already. But then proving that is a totally different story. So what actual plan would you go for here? My first instinct is rook d4, rook other rook to d8, and just take over the open file. But I'm trying to figure out what the long-term strategy should be.
Yeah, I think in general, I mean, like a trade of knights, I feel like would be fantastic. She's just going to go for the very slow, modest doubling of the rooks. I like that this knight hits the b2 pawn, so I would try to leave that knight there, double the rooks, and then I feel like at the right moment, once you get like c5 in or c6, you can start thinking about just b5 and even collecting on b2.
I agree. And for White, I would consider playing g4 at some point to try to lock in that bishop on g6. I don't want to see that bishop open up after move like pawn f6 to f5 because the bishop gets some new life. But g4 has its own risk, and you give the f4 square to the knight, and the f3 pawn also is going to be quite weak. So rook d2. Lars says you double. I'm gonna do the same, and
follow suit.
Yeah, let's fight for this file. And there we go. F5. That's just a good move. And after this, I'm not concerned about her winning chance anymore. As soon as she gets that move in, opening up that bishop, getting rid of her double pawns, I'm all for it.
So maybe something like takes knight e3 followed by f4, and you're threatening like f5 g4, locking that bishop out of the action. And if you play f6 or something, then all of a sudden there's bishop e6 is in the position.
That's a really good call. And I think that was better than what just happened, because now Black should play bishop e6. Your move knight e3 was very frustrating because the pawn f7, the bishop on b3 opens up. Let me start by playing bishop e6. And that way, if you move your knight, I simply trade bishops. What were we talking about? Hey, let's trade pieces. We're up a full pawn.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you're calling it, and she's delivering on demand here, Robert. Bishop e6, ready for trades here. This knight basically cannot be attacked to any degree where it's going to need to move, and if it needs to, it can always go back to one of these lovely squares, and it'll open up potential trades on the d file. So this is tough, because in the last position I was thinking maybe you start running the pawns, but now there's not really any specific targets that Lars can hit in this position.
And there are tactics available for Alina as well. Bishop takes c4, followed by knight takes b2, because that knight is defended on b2 tactically, as the rook on d2 can't move to the side, otherwise the rook behind it falls. However, that would be a very committal decision by Alina, because with her bishop coming off the board, the pawn on f7 may not seem so important, but the idea being that now we have pawns on both sides of the board. Bishops tend to be better than knights in those situations, because bishops are long range pieces and knights take a while to go from one side to the other.
It's a really important point that Robert's highlighting, that although Black can win a pawn here with the tactic he outlined, White takes on f7, and there's going to be a passed pawn that White can create on the king side. And you just have to be so careful, because the bishop can sit on g8 and defend a Black pawn that's pushing while helping a White pawn that's pushing over here. So what just happened? Rook d4, knight e3. So I expect that bishop takes b3 is certainly on the cards. One thing you got to be careful of, Robert, is now that rook is not on a square that you can that's defended, basically. So if that knight gets attacked one more time, it could just be pinned to the rook.
Yeah, that's actually a problem. And I look at the clock. What's a problem for White is not just the pawn deficit. 20 seconds left for Lars. So he is getting down on the clock. He is just down in the position. But we'll see if he's able to find some kind of rook a5, rook h5, swing that rook around, attack some pawns. And that's the problem with isolated pawns, the h7 pawn. It's not that easy to defend. You have to use a more valuable piece just to save that measly pawn.
Absolutely. Knight before rook e2, and now we see just good technique from Alina. She's got the rook in.
And maybe just bring your rook back to d3 and win the b3 pawn. I understand why she traded the rooks here. I guess rook d. Okay, she could have gone after b3, but instead she's just tying White's pieces down, and now knight f4 check, rook to d3 next. I think she's got this.
Rook d3, and now once you take this pawn, rook takes b2 is a threat, or you can start with knight d3. Either one, yeah. She chooses the fancy way.
I support that. Look good. And yeah, the a pawn.
Knight endgame's so tricky, so underrated, but I feel like 3 connected pass pawns, they kind of worked for Lars in that last game, Robert. You think Alina's going to be all right here?
She will, but she has to watch out for pawn h6 for white, knight f6, and if she loses the h7 pawn, all of a sudden Lars has some hope. And look at the clock. She is actually down on time all of a sudden.
I don't know where that came from.
Me neither, but her pawns are too fast. They must be.
B3. B3 is crushing.
Yeah, but she's worried. I mean, she must be worried about the h7 pawn. B2 now, A3. Yeah, we're on the same page completely, partner, and that's just that.
It's just too it's too comfortable when you're up in the commentary booth, and it's good that she calmed herself there. She was getting low on time. That laser focused cam that you see on Alina Kashlinskaya is exactly what helped bring home the point for her there.
Yeah, and her technical abilities have proven very strong, both in last year's edition of this tournament and so far here. It looks good. And now we have a Dutch. So we really are getting different openings every game. That's very exciting for me, and I'm sure for you as well, and for our fans. And all right, this position, let's try to explain what it's all about. Black has put a pawn f5 that could be weakening to the king side. You look at that diagonal, there could be some options there. The e6 square in particular, if white pushes that pawn to d5, maybe you can take advantage and try to put a knight on e6 because no pawns defend the squares. But Aman, why don't you talk about what Black has going for him in a position like this?
Yeah, it's really dependent on the setup. A lot of times Black goes queen e8, we see queen c7. Both of these moves have the same idea. You sort of want to hint at the possibility of potentially playing e5 at some moment. So knight d7 could help that. a5 is just restricting things on the queen side. But if you're not going for e5, a lot of times you can play these positions a lot slower. You can sort of play like king h8, bring your bishop to e6 and g8. And this is a really solid structure. If white ever plays e4, you're looking to take right away, maybe get that bishop out to f5 with tempo. The knight follows to d7. So it can be a really comfortable position for Black to just sort of sit back and wait for white to commit pawns to certain squares. As we see already the queenside initiative by Black, he says, forget development. I'm pushing a5, a4, and looking to open up that a file.
Yeah, which is just trying to get rid of the undeveloped pieces on the queen side. Look at the rook, the knight, and the bishop. So if you can trade rooks, maybe that's beneficial, but you don't want to hand over the open file to Alina's rook either. So knight a6 is played, and I guess knight d7 would have been more typical going towards the center, but then where would that bishop on c8 go? So Black's pieces, to some extent, stepping on each other's toes. And look at this. Alina takes on a4, saying, you know why I put my bishop on c3? So I can push that double a4 pawn to a5, and it's going to be defended over there.
Yeah, I think that was just an oversight by Lars. You generally do not want to let this happen when the pawn can just go to a5 and be defended, because now she's going to plant the rook on b1, generally speaking, hit the b pawn, and Lars saying, I don't care, forget the queen side. I'm going rook e8, e5, as I mentioned earlier. What do we make of this? I have to say Alina has got to have the better position, but you know, the bishop's going to go back to c8 from Lars. It's going to defend b7. So the rook on b1 is not really going to be doing anything the rest of the game, and there's always pressure on that d pawn. If you ever take, the knight makes it in the game.
I love that move, though, c5, and that is actually quite standard in a position like this. The pawn on d6 is not defended by a pawn, it's defended by a piece, the queen. So if I can take on d6, I will get a tempo against that queen. So that's why pawn takes d4 for Black doesn't just win a pawn. And if pawn e4, I'll throw in pawn takes d6 as well. That way I don't allow the position to be locked up. And here, don't take on c5, go take towards the center. Probably d takes e5 here looks good, but I think that the tactical nature of this should make Lars feel like he's a chance, especially with the d5 square available to that knight on f6.
Yep. Don't forget that both knights now have some squares to just sort of jump around to. Knight d5, knight b4. I will say I think that Alina is just better. after taking and maybe save that bishop or go a3. Kind of looks like a funny move, but take control of that b4 square. Eventually, white's going to go e4. And if everything takes there, the d6 square anchored with that pawn on e5 is going to be pretty juicy for Alina. Now, she's really having a think here. I think she's maybe giving consideration to pawn takes c5. But I'm kind of wondering, because if you take on e5 with the knight, it just doesn't look right, giving up d4 here.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think another thing to point out is the c4 square is now free. You have vacated it by pushing your pawn forward. So the knight would love to land there. So if d takes e5, followed by knight c4, hey, that e5 pawn and the a5 pawn are both defended by that powerful knight on c4, which is trying to go into d6 and wreak havoc in black's position.
Yeah, so she's giving a long think there. I think she came up with the best decision overall. And she wants everything. Basically, like, she can get a3, knight c4. This game is all but over. But you mentioned how tactical Lars has appeared to be in the match so far, Robert. Do you think he's just going to go for f4 here, try to get that bishop out and just try to get some energy going on the king side? Because the position looks kind of rough otherwise. You mentioned knight c4. That looks so strong.
Yeah, positionally, black is toast. And black is down a pawn. So bishop e6... I'm with you. I think that an a3, you have this completely under control. I think that even though he didn't do it right away, he must go f4. I don't actually see an attack, but perhaps the threat of the attack is enough, considering this is a blitz game and mistakes happen much more regularly in blitz. Alina is a great player. Lars is a great player as well, but you can't just sit here when you're down a pawn. The knight's coming to c4 into d6. The b7 pawn is a target. Your knight on a6 is a donkey because the b4 square is now covered by the pawn on a3. So everything is looking favorable for white. So you just need to mix it up, because otherwise you'll just get rolled over here.
If white gets to have everything that she wants now, and I mean e3, if white gets to play e3 as well as knight c4, this game is just a roll. It's completely over. So you have to get something going. a3 is just a dagger move to play. It might not look like much, but you mentioned the donkey on a6. Lars is probably thinking, and he's like, oh my goodness, why didn't I just throw knight b4? Or I don't know, why didn't I just play f4 when I had the chance? Because now I think it's now or never, Robert. If not f4, I think Alina has this game. She's up on time as well.
Completely agreed. And one more thing I'll add is queen takes a5 may seem like a free pawn at first, but you drop the b7 pawn, and that would be devastating. So look at these last two moves. Bishop e6, and then bishop back to c8, spending about a minute and 40 seconds between the two. And Alina doesn't need to think at this moment because, well, her position is so good. I would play e3 and just say, I would play no e3 f4 for you.
And he's rerouting that knight to d7, trying to put pressure there. But again, it's just a non-threat.
You can also play knight move and pawn to f4 for white. Oh, I like that move, though. Knight b6. That's just nice.
Ouch.
The queen gets trapped if you take the knight.
That's hilarious. I'm just going to put that on the board. That is a funny looking trap. And the queen is looking at the knight and bishop like, whose side are you on here?
And you know what's funny about this? Knight a8 was like almost trapping the queen as well. So
oh my goodness.
Oh, she just stole the c5 pawn. So the knight going back to b8 removed the defender of the pawn on c5, and now she's up 2 full pawns.
Yeah, knight g5 or knight d4 are going to be, some of the next moves considered here. The d5 knight is going to be in real trouble. I mean, this is a matter of time. I feel like she's playing fantastic at the moment, and Lars is just defending. He's just on the back foot.
And knight g5 played, and this is just all sorts of problematic. If you win that bishop on e6, you trade it for that knight, then remember how we talked about the Dutch? It opens up the king. Look at that diagonal. I would love to take your knight on d5 and then start putting pressure on the diagonal. So just take with a pawn on b6.
Yeah, take with the pawn, and then you could even take on e6 and just go f4, or you could start with f4. But as soon as you play f4, I think it's just over. It locks absolutely all this firepower aimed at e5 that you see in this position. F4 just says, nope.
It's as simple as that, a one-word response. You know, when you ask your parents when you're younger, can I do something? And they just go, nope. You're like, yep, that's it. All right.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna put my head down, run back to my room. That's that. Yeah, that's what F4 does.
I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince this one's a lost cause.
Yeah, I would play F4 here. I wonder if she's just trying to make sure her king doesn't get in any future danger, but There are no pieces to attack with, as you said. All of them are biting on granite because they're staring at the e5 pawn, which is defended by another pawn. And this is a clear illustration of why we always say a pawn's best friend is another pawn. A 1 point piece defends another 1 point piece, while all of Black's heavy pieces are staring into that, which is defended.
And because Alina is playing so well right now, it's tough to even find criticism. So I'll offer one, is I feel like she's so calculated, almost to a detriment, that in positions like this where it's so intuitive, she eats up a lot of clock time playing moves that you could play, kind of in a more flowy fashion, a little bit quicker. And Lars always ends up making the game close in a time scramble. Now, last time, remember, we looked at the clock and we were like, wait a minute, how is she the one lower on time? Now, she still converted the game, and that's definitely her style. But just pointing that out as something to keep an eye on for the rest of this match, as she consistently gets these dominating positions, but maybe needs to play a little bit more intuitively when she's got the upper hand. We see the engine at pretty much +5 right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. For example, there she could have taken on e6 instead of putting her knight back on f3. She did knight f3 very quickly, so that's good. But some of the decisions, I feel like she can just play and trust herself. And that's a key factor in blitz, is how much confidence you have, and are you trusting your instincts? Sometimes we trust our instincts and fail miserably, right? I've done that many times where I'm like, oh, this sacrifice looks good, and wait a sec, nope, it just fails to this simple response. And look at this move by Lars. c5, it doesn't change the balance of the game. White is so much better here, but at least it complicates things, and that is what Lars has been doing well. Now he's trying to go knight d7 at some point when the b6 pawn. Guess what? You can't play knight d7. There's a rook on d1 covering the open file. So the position is miserable, but it's really not, what we're talking about right now is not about this specific moment, but how this match will continue, what the trends are like. And I do think that ultimately Alina is playing extremely well here, but I'm with you that sometimes she gets herself in a little bit too much trouble than the position calls for.
This is just surgical at the moment. There's no other word for it. I mean, every move from Alina has just been top notch right now. And Lars even coming in with a pre-move there. Bishop c4.
The queen's trapped. Oh, no, it's a4. Sorry. It has a4, but bishop d5 check. Look at that beautiful move.
Great. And that's going to win the rook on c6. Actually, no, not quite. Not quite. Bishop takes. There's going to be bishop takes back. And here's that 15 seconds ticking down. Lars is dead in the water. It's +10. But hey, there's 10 seconds left. Anyone can flag is what we've learned so far.
Yes, and she's doing a good job because Lars' pieces can't move with the queen's back on a8. But she needs to move. She's 6 seconds.
This is what we're saying.
What are you doing?
Exactly.
You gotta go. 2 seconds. How did she make them with 1 second go? Oh my gosh. She lost in time. She forgot. Look at her reaction. And Lars is like,
what I'm saying.
Did you see Lars? He goes,
what I'm saying.
Did I do that? He's like, what just happened? And that was the most winning position you could ask for. And we are going to take a break. We have that midway point in the longest time control here. But Aman, I'm beside myself. We were just highlighting that you can't spend so much time in positions that she should just trust herself in. What can we make of that?
I said it, and I brought it up for a reason, because she was doing so many good things that, I mean, she's not a perfect player. We have to highlight maybe one of her only weaknesses in positions like that is she gets so involved with the calculations, and they're all brilliant. We saw even at the very end with 10 seconds, we were looking at bishop d6. Oh, so impressive. Puts the queen back on a8. But Lars, he plays queen a8 in about 0.3 seconds. And meanwhile, she's taking 10 seconds for queen f7. He plays queen a6 in 0.1 seconds, and then she flags. And that's going to be something to look in the entire match. Watch out for that, because she is outplaying Lars significantly right now. But Robert, this cannot keep up. She has to trust herself more in positions and start using instincts. This is blitz, after all.
I will just say that if you believe in karmic balance, the fact that Lars lost the first game on time in a position he had checkmate and won, maybe this is kind of payback for that. She loses on time in a completely winning position. I would say the first 2 games, I would give the nod to Lars. These last 2 games, Alina has played great chess. It is a 2-2 match. We will take a short break, and when we return, we'll have the latter half of this longest time control, 5-minute plus 1 second increment portion of this I'm Not a GM Speed Chess Championship, brought to you by Chess.com. Well, we barely had time to catch our breath. I hope the players were able to because Amon, that was a whirlwind of a first 4 games. It is 2-2. It's a tied match, but this has been kind of anything but even, not by how they played, but just by the direction of the match. And Alina was on the cusp of a 3-1 lead, and all of a sudden she loses on time in a +10 position.
Yeah, and you mentioned, a bit of karma there, whether you think it's that or not. I think somehow, based on the chess we've seen, the time management we've seen, everything we've seen so far, somehow I feel like 2-2 is exactly the score that this match should be at. So we've got that 2-2 match. I think this is going to be a very exciting one for people that maybe are just tuning in. We have Lars Hauge against Alina Kashlinskaya. And I guarantee that this is going to be a very close one because from what we've seen, Alina is capable of completely outplaying her opponent, but also completely blundering and flagging where nobody should be doing that. So it's a tale of two very different styles here.
That's certainly the case. And I'm trying to figure out who has the momentum here, if you believe in that, because Alina dominated that game. So from the chess player's point of view, you're like, well, that's a great game. I'd rather be crushing my opponent and just happen to lose in time. But at the same time, you need to win. It's a match. And Lars is like, I played some really not great chess in that game, and I still got the point. So who does that favor?
Well, I'll first say that Lars played the move e4, and then they went to a break, and they came back, and then he goes d4. So he's getting in her head a little bit there. But who's it actually favoring? I think that Lars, based on his style, is probably really happy with how the match has gone. And I also don't think Alina is the one to be affected by emotions, so to say. So I don't think it'll be a negative against her. But I think Lars is saying, look, as you pointed out, I haven't played my best chess. I also missed the mate in 1 first round. Things have kind of been up and down, but at the end of the day, it's 2-2 right now. If I start playing better chess and competing over the board more, I'm still going to have, this natural blitz tendency, this time management that he's been showing the entire match so far. So I think he's probably happy, and if he improves, things work out.
Sorry, knight b5 sighting. I saw rook on c1. I saw queen on c8. And I was like, wait a sec, the pawn on c6 is pinned. Knight b5 threatens to go knight c7 check with the fork of the king and the rook. And if you take the knight, this is a problem.
What?
Yeah, this is not good. And if we just take kind of one move back for a second, e takes d5 is the natural reply when there's a rook staring down the file against the queen. But knight takes d5 had to have been played so that you can trade off the knights so the white knight can't get to b5.
And knight d5 is not insane either, because with the bishop on f4, you do have that move available and often played. It's often required a lot of the time. So knight b5, that's just a stone cold miss from Alina and sort of rare in the opening for her.
Yeah, and well, the game isn't quite over yet, because if you play knight c7, the king will have to go to d8, and then you'll take this rook on the corner. And so you'll essentially get the situation, and it's what we're about to have, where black will have a bishop for a rook. White's pawn structure will be worse. White's king is still in the center for now. So maybe it's not the end of the world, because for rooks to dominate minor pieces, you need open files. And there really aren't many of those just yet. And the rooks aren't connected in any meaningful way. So perhaps Alina still has a chance in this game.
Yeah, and I think Lars is thinking about knight takes d5 here to take back here and say, look, I'd rather win a pawn and have that happen, but knight takes d5, bishop e6. I think he's eventually going to conclude that that's just too murky, and that's why he's going to take that rook.
For sure. And we get this position. Look, she doesn't even take the knight because the knight has nowhere to go. The b6 square, the c7 square covered. This is why knights in the corner of the board are not good. Simple math. Only 2 squares that I can escape to. It's not going anywhere. So good move, I would say bishop d3. At some point, Alina will have to go queen takes a8. And if that's the case, your queen's all the way in the corner, and now white's queen can try to make progress on the other side of the board.
Yeah, and I wouldn't hate this position too much if I was Alina. Like, of all the things that you could have after knight b5, I feel like she's kind of doing as the best she can. She's going to pick up that f4 pawn, I think. Yeah, hit the rook. There is a rook that can arrive to the e file, but white has either rook or knight to e2 pretty comfortably in this position. There we go.
And he played knight e2, as you were suggesting, and then castled. And he could take that pawn h7. Like, there are pieces that are loose in the position, and he hasn't gone for them.
Because knight g3 is so quick, but g6 not only covers h7, but stops knight f5, knight h5. The knight can't go to e4. I think the knight on g3 is horrible. And as you pointed out, queen takes h7, you just start cleaning up the house there on the king side.
Yeah. And while I like this in the sense that he's trying to take over the open file, and now probably queen f3 is very strong because the knight is defended, and that's the problem with playing
It's almost
g6.
like he thought the king was like on g8, so used to having the king castle that you sort of forget, wait a minute, my position is ludicrous. Like, what's going on?
And you know what's interesting is we've been a bit critical of Alina for playing too slowly in certain moments. She played too quickly right there. Like there was no need to rush knight to f6. She's up plenty of time, and the position was far from over at this point in time. So knight f6, a poor decision, probably stemming from the fact that she's been losing all game. She had the oversight early on move 8 or whatever it was, and so she could never really get her head into this game. That's what I would chalk this up to.
Yeah, and it actually is going to be a 3-2 lead for Lars, and he can credit that pretty much to that knight b5 that we saw. So that opening trick that Robert pointed out, that's at this high level, that's enough to win the game.
For sure, and we are back to a Dutch. So there's something about this that Lars liked, even though we hated pretty much every step of the way for Black's position. But here we see a difference. e6, queen e7, and this is a totally different dynamic. And the difference being that instead of c6, queen c7, the queen's in the center of the board, the knight comes to the center rather than over in there on a6. So he's playing more principled chess, but at the same time, we still like the situation for white because you can play rook e1, try to go pawn e4 at some moment, maybe start with queen c2 to bring the other rook over to e1. It just feels more flexible for white.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's also important to remember, it's like, we're wondering what Lars liked about this as he's repeating it. It's like, well, I think I know what Alina liked about it. Maybe it was the +10 or the +11, that she had last time. So she will repeat this all day, I feel like, until Lars proves that he has a line that does a lot better. One thing to consider before playing e5 by Black is sometimes the strange move c6 just to take control of the d5 square first and then play e5. So I feel like c6, e5 is the better order, but of course, e5 straight away is possible.
And that's actually why Alina played rook c1, is if e5, now knight d5 has that serious punch because the rook is staring down the c file at that pawn on c7. So I like the way you explained that, and she's showing exactly what Aman's talking about. And here, well, maybe you have to play c6 or maybe a6 just to take away the b5 square, because knight b5, surprisingly, is an annoying threat in some positions.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine e5 takes your move knight b5. It like hits the pawn and threatens bishop a3. That's exactly right.
Well, speaking of bishop a3, she went for it because that pawn on d6 is now tender. And if you play e5, you can no longer take back with a pawn. That pawn is pinned to the queen. And by playing e5, you'd open up the queen on d1 to that pawn on d6. That would be a humongous blunder. But d5 for white is still tempting to my eyes because I'm trying to get to that pawn on d6. And I'm trying to take one of your pawns, c6 or e6, and get right through to it.
Yeah, so d5, I guess my instinct would be like e takes, c takes, and then c5, and almost try to turn it into some sort of fianchetto Benoni or something all of a sudden. Actually,
that is a serious idea for Black because the pawn f5 is very helpful because typically in the Benoni, white's pawns are on e4, maybe an f4, you're just crushing in the center. Now Black has everything under control. So perhaps my move d5, I'm tunneling on this pawn on d6, and some kind of waiting move, something that can grow the position before you force the action, is recommended.
Yeah, like what about your moves that you mentioned, queen d3, queen c2, you mentioned earlier, just trying to get e4. And the nice thing about this is that Black can't meet this with e5 before that happens. So d3, by the way, probably better than c2 because it also stops at b5, which was maybe a potential idea.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a really good point. So it's just limiting your opponent's options here. So queen e3 does it all. It keeps d6 under your attention. You take away the e4 square from maybe a knight e4 for Black, and now white can play e4 herself. And just all of Black's typical options, not really feasible here. So what is Black's move at this point?
That's a good question. I'll wait for Lars to maybe show me the way here because e5, not possible. Obviously, d5, not possible. c5, I would say possible and maybe interesting, but it would certainly be a move that's different than what he's been trying to go for with his last couple moves. He says no, d5 anyway.
Did you see that she pre-moved pawn takes b5?
Yeah.
She knew that was coming and
Yeah.
she pre-moved the pawn takes and then went bishop to b4. So the pawn on b5, I guess, couldn't be captured because some kind of bishop a6 type of thing, but that's why she put her bishop on b4 real quick.
And bishop b7 by black. If knight takes b5, hitting the d6 pawn, there might be an intermezzo. Bishop e4, and that queen is tethered to the knight on b5, and I'm not so sure that you can trust that position there.
Yeah, all of those positions are actually really interesting because when you take on b5 with your knight, the d6 pawn now is under attack, but you have to really dig deep and calculate. You can't just say, oh, this looks good, because at a certain point, it'll be finger pointing and counting like, wait, if I go there, my opponent goes there, and so on. So, wow, look at that move. a5, another pawn sacrifice by Lars here. But you know what I don't love? Sorry, Amon, what I don't love is when you make a move as a pawn sacrifice and then start thinking after.
Yeah, it's like, what? What was the plan there? Because you know what white was threatening in the last position was knight to e5. So a slower move like a6, maybe knight e5 happens, and there's knight c6, and if you take it, pawn takes, and you're using that pin. So maybe a5 was just the necessary move. And is he going to follow it up with b4, or what's he thinking of? Because I think b4 and getting the knight involved in one of those nice central outposts and backing it up with the other knight might be the way to go here.
Oh, of course. But the question is, why did he spend 37 seconds making that? Because it's not, we're not trying to roast the guy, but the thing is, of course, that was his follow-up. But then maybe he saw a ghost and was like, hey, actually, b4, that might not be it. But it had to be the follow-up. You played a5 to dislodge the bishop. And then b4, of course, came next. So that is one of those moments where he may regret it, considering he is down over a minute on the clock now.
And sometimes what happens is you plan on playing b4, and then you calculate a line after b4, and you're like, wait, maybe that's not so good. And then you take a step back. You're like, wait a minute, I don't have an option. Just play b4 and stop thinking about it.
Right.
Trust yourself.
If I'm going to think about if b4 is good, I should have done that before I played a5. And here the position is really fascinating because the bishop on a5 is trapped. Look at that knight on d5, protecting b4, covering b6, covering c7. All of that bishop's escape score. So queen to a7. If you can dart that queen to a7, the bishop is trapped. So she says, let me play e4 and blast the center of the board open. And just like in an attack, you can distract your opponent by opening the center. Maybe that bishop on a5 is maybe trapped, but if I open the center here, queen a7, there could be knight takes d6. Here, there's some knight b6, bishop b6. One of these moves probably saves that bishop on a5.
Yeah, knight b6 saves the bishop, but I guess you don't have to, you don't have to obviously allow rook a5 and drop the bishop on c8. So she's going to start like this. There is bishop takes d5 as well, followed by knight b6.
Wow, she goes for that. But
there's also bishop c7 or bishop b6, but...
So she's sacrificing an exchange because bishop a6 just hits the queen and binds the rook. But look at the material count. What's the material here? White has 2 extra pawns, and it's almost like having 3 extra pawns because of the double d6, d5 situation. But I guess d4 is also under attack. This is a mess.
This is a mess. I feel like it's a mess that black should be, on the good side of coming out of this. But as you mentioned, a lot of pawns are going to be falling. I think takes and just takes on d4 is probably pretty good. Yeah, he's going to go for that.
I don't think I would have traded. I don't like the look of that bishop staring down my f2 pawn, but perhaps she'll play bishop c5 at some point. Although that actually will fail to rook takes a4. So be careful about those kind of moves.
That's true. Bishop f4 though, followed by maybe h4, king g2. Get that rook to d1 now.
Yeah, that's a nice way to deal with this because the knight a4 is trapped. The bishop on d4 keeps it stuck. So rook d1 perhaps is necessary, and she plays it right now. You can play bishop f2 check, king takes f2, and g5. You're inducing that king into a pin by sacrificing your bishop, but black doesn't have that many pawns remaining, so that could allow white to escape.
If there's one thing that's hard to do, it's win a chess game with no pawns on the board. It doesn't matter how much material you're up. You'd be surprised how much you rely on those pawns. You don't even think about them, but in your head, there's something clicking that says, oh yeah, and I'll win because this will be a queen eventually or something.
Absolutely. And so that means rook e4 is a smart move. By the way, rook takes d4 almost works. Rook d4, rook takes the bishop e5, hitting both rooks that cannot defend each other, but there's rook d1 check. So maybe play king g2 and just try to be sneaky.
That is very sneaky. King g2, like g5 might be tempting, and then rook takes d4 as an idea.
Yes, and she plays king f1. Oh, you know what's a new idea? It's pawn f3 to kick the rook, which is the only defender of the bishop on d4, because king f1
Yeah,
looks bad after
that's the
g5.
idea.
All right, g5 looks like it just wins the f2 pawn by force. The bishop needs to move. I take on f2, but the bishop doesn't have to move just because it's under attack. You play this clever pawn f3 move, kick the rook out of e4, and now the
And
complications continue.
Alina is up a minute on the clock here, 20 seconds approaching for Lars. He's got to make a difficult decision. If not g5 here, he's got to sack the rook on f4.
Yeah, on g5, okay, and she's going to play f3, right?
Yeah, f3, and I think the rook just goes back.
Mm-hmm. And then rook takes d4. I mean, I would not complain at all if I had this position for white.
No, absolutely. And I think after taking, you take with the pawn. I think you leave your rook on d4. You want to hit the d pawn. Your knight can rejoin.
I might actually even play king f2 and say, take me on g3, keep my pawns connected. I don't
Yep.
want any loose pawns, but she does what you said, and I like what Lars did quickly here. Rook c2 coming, and try to get
Yep.
a back rank checkmate against the king. I think you need to run your king up. She does just that.
Yeah, and get f5 and king f4. That's going to be crucial. f5,
Yes.
I think, is super important here.
Yeah, and that's something that's easy to miss when you're trying to calculate a variation to this extent. But f5, there she played it. Amon, you had it covered, and now the king escapes to f4. d5 is falling. The knight will come
Yep.
back in the game, and you may laugh, but white might win this game, not just because of the
Oh, yeah.
time, but because of the position. After rook takes d5, that knight comes into c5, maybe even to e4, and the black king isn't exactly the safest king there is.
No. And if you play knight takes, though, keep in mind there's rook, check, and rook takes d4 with an outside passed h-pawn. That h-pawn might be the hero in this game because there's still winning chances for black now that the h-pawn has been taken.
I think there are winning chances for both sides at this point. I prefer white's position. The clock, you have
Yeah.
3 pawns and a knight for a rook. And now, wait a second. I feel like there are going to be some forks in the near future, but knight d4 should do the trick.
It's so scary to think like these rooks are just so poorly coordinated. Rook h4 is an idea.
Yes, but now the king can go to e5 thanks to that check there. So a4 played, rook h4, king e5. Let's go. King d5 only move. Literally the only move. And a5, push him.
Yeah, it's got to be a5 here. Remember, there's I don't like the look of that move.
Yeah, that because the knight is very slow. You mentioned this in the previous game.
Ooh, I was going to say rook h1, but you don't need to take these pawns. He's getting greedy here.
And he can't take them because after rook f5, a6, your rook can't get to the pawn. a6, a7. Promote me.
I don't think he I don't think he realized rook f4. He like sandwiched himself very nicely. Then he sandwiched himself there, Robert.
Yeah.
It just had to be rook like h1, h2, and just get behind the pawn and run that h pawn and hope for the best.
And that was a huge mistake by him. And we're back to game 1 in a French, but a different kind of French. We now have a Tarash, and the difference being that the position is a little bit more open. White's knight on d2 may not be the best square for it, but can always go to b3. And
right.
I guess I'm still not over that last game. I'm trying to force myself to be that professional commentator who moves on when the next game begins. But yeah, that was a huge miss by Lars in that game.
It's true. And it's really exciting because every game we've seen has had some conclusion that we haven't been able to just go to the next game immediately. It's always something to think about. And you got to wonder whether these players have short-term memory. I feel like they do. Both of them seem to be going into that next game no problem. Whereas the time scrambles we've seen have been seriously intense.
For real. And I saw Lars' reaction. His eyes went wide. He's like, what just happened there? But in all seriousness and reality, it was actually never clear. Like, I wouldn't say that his advantage was anything to speak of throughout the entire game. So maybe he overestimated his position at points, and that's how you get to this kind of position. You have a rook against a knight, so you should be better in theory, but then there are all these pawns to deal with. So I wonder if that played a part, where that material, it makes you feel confident that you should have good winning chances, but in reality, it was nothing like that. And look at this move. b5 says, hey, have a free pawn, snack on that. My bishop's coming to b7. That's a juicy diagonal to work with.
Holy smokes. And that's not the first b5 pawn sack that we've seen in this match, Robert. So no. both players are just willing to toss the pawn and say, look, give me the initiative. That's more what blitz is all about.
Yeah, and if you castle, I was about to say, if you castle queenside, if you are Alina, you're happy in a sense that you don't have the B pawn, because
Yeah.
what do you want to do when kings are not beside the board? You want to attack. How can you attack? Sure, you can create a pawn storm, or you can use open files. And without a B pawn, your rook comes to B8. That is an open file to work with, and it's not like the king on C1 has that many defenders in front of it. So I believe the evaluation bar that I see on screen here, white is slightly better, but it's a very tricky position full of plenty of tactical opportunities.
Certainly, I think king b1 is reasonable. White would love to play knight g3, hitting the queen, but bishop takes e3 is going to be a check, and you can't take with the queen because queen takes b5. So either moving the bishop back, which has happened, or king b1 seemed reasonable there. Rook c8, and wow, already mounting the attack, as you mentioned, those open files.
And look at this, counterattack time. Pawn to g4 comes to mind. Here, you can have that pawn. Take it. Your g7 pawn behind your knight that captured on g4 will be a target. And I want to point something out very quickly, is that rook f to c8. I know the rook on a8 couldn't get there yet, but we're often taught to bring our rooks to the center of the board. But Alina is saying, no, my attack is what I'm going for. Queen a5, rook b8. Now I have my three major pieces, my queen and my two rooks, on the A, the B, and the C file. And guess what? There's a king on that's going to b1 soon, I imagine, that's not going to be happy to see that configuration of pieces.
Yeah, that's a great point. And being able to go queen h5 to a5 completely changes the scope of the position. I mean, g5 by white is merely an attack. It's not attack on the knight, rather, not an attack on the king. I don't think that things are going to be as quick for Lars on the king side. But if he wants to, g5, knight g4, and then try to sacrifice the knight on f6 or h6, that might be the play.
You know, I was looking at some kind of Fabiano Caruana style tactics with g5 and bishop takes h7 check and just going for it. And, you know, sometimes you're inspired for good reasons. Other times you see a great player do something and you're like, yeah, I'm a pretty good player. Let me try that too. And you're like, well, that's why I am not in that player's shoes, because when I do it, it doesn't work. But that's what I'm thinking of. Maybe I can get a bishop takes h7 check. And if I get the rook lift as well, that could be a big problem. So actually, rook g4 is a sneaky move at this point. If I can, you know, the knight goes to c5, maybe there is bishop takes h7 check, rook h4, queen h5, and all this good stuff. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
That would be funny. That would be crazy.
Yeah, this is wishful thinking for the attack. I think a move like your king b1 move doesn't look as good now. I know we're suggesting at this moment because you're walking into rook b8 and tactics on the b file, but that's where your head goes to. Is like, maybe I need to move my king to safety, but no, towards the corner of the board is not safety in this position.
Very tough position. I mean, knight to g4 sort of springs to mind as getting the knight involved, but I don't think that's the way you want to go. There's a lot of hanging pawns, hanging checks in the position. This is tough. This is very tough. Both sides launching an attack. I think the engine evaluation is just not going to help anyone here.
Right. Not that they know what it is, but it's certainly not going to help them. Wow, that is a big decision, because after bishop takes e4, now the b file is cleared. So rook b8 threatens queen takes b2 check with a mate to follow. And the bishop is now brought in to attack the c2 pawn. If you ask me, if you force me to make a prediction in this game, I think black is going to win.
Yep, that's what it looks like right now, just because also that bishop can just go back to g6. So even if the attack doesn't work, I mean, you just kind of bring the pieces to open files, bring the bishop back, and you just have pressure. Black can almost, in a crazy world, just say, hey, queen takes h2. I know it looks ludicrous, but give me that free pawn. Your attack is nothing. It doesn't scare me.
Hey, we're all a fan of ludicrous here. I mean, queen takes h2 looks great. So I'm with you there that the bishop on e4 is that powerful of a piece. It's on the longest diagonal, so it goes all the way back to a8 and then hits the h1 corner while attacking the pawn on c2 and defending h7. So queen f4 check, by the way. If king b1, there might be bishop takes c2, or there's bishop f3 is the threat. So what's happening here?
Yeah, it looks like bishop f3. You have to go like queen e3, there's rook c4.
Yeah, so queen
f4. What the heck is
going
on here?
Queen f4 check, maybe queen e3 to start.
Right.
That must be the option. But then I don't trade queens. I just move my queen away to h4, perhaps. It's getting a little bit
and remember,
tricky.
rook takes c4 almost works because you have rook c2, but the queen is going to be hitting the bishop, so there's no rook takes f2, takes f4. It's kind of important to remember that whenever there's a discovered check, make sure to first confirm whether or not you can take the piece that's giving the check.
That's a really important point, because that would look almost winning for Alina. But the bishop, if it were on g6, it works. The bishop on e4, it's under attack. So The queen needs to move, but queen h4, which is what I suggested before, runs into rook d4, defending the knight on c4 and pinning the bishop on e4. I don't like that so much. So queen f5 is the only other way to keep the attack going. And knight d6 would look scary, but now rook takes c2 check is a cool move because the knight forks the house after queen f5,
Right.
knight d6, but c2 hangs the check. Then I move my rook out the way, and there's another check, and that should pick up material for Alina.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And c2 is hanging. The knight is hanging. It looks like maybe a rook d4 kind of has to be played. You lose this pawn, but sometimes when the bishop takes in front of the queen, it's not the best coordination to have. Like all of a sudden, white starts to get a few tempi.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And if you could somehow get that knight to feel defended, so you don't have to worry about it every turn, white will then establish some control over the board here, but not when you lose the c2 pawn. I mean, that's a very scary pawn to drop, but I'm with you that rook d4 looks like the move that may have to be played. And what's funny is after rook d4, bishop to c2, maybe queen e5 or something like that is possible. Perhaps not queen e5, but the point is, if I trade queens there, there's no pieces on light squares. So you have a discovery with the bishop, but nothing to win.
Literally everything would be on dark squares. That's hilarious. Knight d6 also jumped out at me, maybe as a possibility on that last turn, just because, again, speaking of taking the discovered checker, you know, that knight d6 hits the rook. That's the piece that's giving the check, not the bishop. So
but there
knight
would have
d6
been
was definitely possible.
some kind of bishop b3, queen c2 mate, right? Like the bishop would have moved out the way and the queen would have landed where that bishop came from. So you're right that you are attacking the checker. And look what he did. He somehow has kind of escaped, but now I'm looking at the clock. He's down a minute on time. I see the eval bar. Black is doing extremely well. If knight takes e5 here, rook c2 check, or rook takes c1 and queen c2 mate, something like that is just devastating. So e5 is a very good move. I have to give Alina credit. The queen can't take because f2 falls the check and the position collapses. So it's looking great for Alina, and she's up a minute and 10 seconds. And this, we've talked about this before. Don't want to jinx her. She needs to play confidently and not get herself in time trouble to match Lars's clock.
Yeah, something's like rook d8, I was going to say. And then remember, if the piece is exchanged and the king goes to e2, you always have like bishop b5, just increasing the pressure. Basically, if Alina ever gets an h5 in to have a king, a safety square, some luft, that's going to be the end of the game.
King on c3.
This is crazy. b3 next. Lars, he doesn't care. He's got 7 seconds. He may as well go for it.
And look at him with rook d3 check. Oh, walks right into it. But it's not the end of the game. Like after rook d3 check, you have to give up your queen. You get the bishop. So materially speaking, black is of course ahead, but there could be some universe where that a7 pawn drops and all of a sudden.
I like queen takes g5 though.
Yeah, that should do it.
Because now when you can play h5 and there's no g pawn in the way, so the a pawns are double. There's no way to get a pass pawn. I'm feeling pretty confident here for Alina. Just play h5 or something.
I'd feel much better about white's chance if you could put a bishop on e3 rather than knight, and not to take the queen, but just to defend more of the board. Right, the bishop is strong in attacking one side of the board while defending the other. Here, that's not happening, and the a7 pawn will survive. So with that being the case, Alina should be able to put this one away.
Yeah. Queen c7 even, or queen d6 is better.
Yeah. Okay.
I was just picking everything up.
How many pawns does she have? Just 2. It looks like more.
Yeah, it feels like more. I think at some point she needs to I would take the a pawn. Okay, and it's going to be resignation.
Yeah.
He says, look, just go next. Go next. I've had enough of that position, had enough of that game. And when Alina is on, she's really on, Robert. Like when she wins, it's a beautiful game. Start to finish, Alina took control. It was ever since b5, I feel like black had the initiative and was dictating the tempo. So, I mean, it's really impressive when Alina puts that full game together. It's more about the clock and time management. Those are the areas that she seems to suffer in sometimes.
I'm with you there. And we're back to the Dutch, and a different version of the Dutch because the bishop's on e7 rather than on g7. So it's just interesting that even when we have the same starting moves, we get a unique position. And here we see e4. We talked about this the first time we saw the Dutch. You blast open the center, and guess what? Black's pieces are quite passive here. Look at the bishop on c8, the bishop on e7, and the pawn on e6 is going to be a long-term target if you take on e4. That's not exactly pleasant for Black to deal with.
Yeah. And even though you can toss in the move knight b4, White's just going to retreat the queen to e2 and take back all the same on e4. But this is a natural freeing move, but I don't think that it's necessarily the worst thing for Black to allow. I mentioned sometimes taking everything on e4 is exactly what the Dutch player needs to free the pieces. Like sometimes you take everything and there's some sort of knight b4 followed by d5. Give your knight that d5 square, you give up the e5 square, but you get a square for yourself. So knight b4 is going to be played, and we'll have to see what the follow-up is, because I think it's got to be taking and some sort of e5 or d5 break in the center to gain some space.
E5, hard to play once you remove the knight from c6, because it might just drop a pawn. And oh, wow, okay, so the bishop f5 is the idea. So tactics everywhere. I'm with you now. I underestimated this. I was thinking about the material, but bishop f5, getting the c2, the d3 square under control, that is actually pretty scary.
And when he played that move, he sat back, like he it's almost like that move had some kickback to it. Like as soon as he played it, he started rocking back in the chair, and he is ready for the tactical skirmish that's about to occur here.
And it's about even the clock. This is what happens in these long time control games. I was thinking that we'd be down to a minute left per player, and then I look and they still have 4 minutes left. I'm like, oh wait, they actually do have time to think, because we just went right from a finish where there's not much time to all of a sudden, okay, let's breathe, let's figure this out. So now that we're trying to do that, can I take on e5 knowing that bishop f5 is coming? She does that, but where's her queen going? Is she going to take on b7 as well? No, she sits on, wait, knight c2 with a fork? Queen d5
so
check.
Knight c2, queen d5 check, king h8 is sort of the expected variation there. And then is it going to be something aggressive, like getting the bishop out, or is it really going to be that rook b1? Because rook b1 looks like knight b4 back, and you just lose a full rook.
Yeah, this doesn't look ideal, but we've seen her play an exchange down before.
I think she wants to take on d6, and if bishop takes, then like bishop g5 with tempo, and then she would get a rook out safely.
Okay, and what if you take with the queen on d6?
Didn't quite get to that one, Robert.
And we don't need to. It's okay. We can just pretend like that line didn't exist.
We had it covered.
So now the e5 pawn, at the very least, Black should be able to make a draw on those variations of knight c2, move the knight back away, and the rook on b1 will be hanging. So that's why she played bishop g5. But I'm kind of concerned she's playing more for a loss than a win. And it feels like Black's pieces are perfectly situated. The rook on d8 can go down to d2 at some point soon. The bishop on f5 is doing great. The knight on b4 is excellent. So isn't Black better? And the eval bar seems to indicate as much.
Here even like I think maybe you have a choice between h6, c6. All of those kind of moves seem pretty decent. h6, knight e4, rook d4 might just be a good way to get doubled with tempo. And yeah, even though there's an isolated pawn there, you have to look at the piece activity. Black is enjoying an open d file, an open f file, as we see rook d4 played. And yeah, it's knight c5, I think just b6, or c pawn will be loose after that.
Right.
b6, rook takes c4.
Where does the knight plan to go? Well, b6, rook takes c4. There could be a3 and some bishop d5 check. So you have to be careful if you're Lars before you take that pawn on c4. As there will be that check on the diagonal and picking up the rook. So
that's a good point. I think I would start with this and then reevaluate rook c4, because b6 is under attack right now, and after b6, there's nowhere dangerous that the knight seemingly can go.
And I did not like this move, because now if the knight takes b7, the knight is safe over there. a5 is hanging, and I want to keep my a pawn. I want to take on a5 and then promote that a pawn thanks to the bishop on g2.
Although, that bishop on g2, long range.
Although I just caught myself, because bishop d3 is a threat for Black, trying to win the f2 pawn. So it looks like there's that outside pass pawn that will go well for you, but Black has the initiative right now, and you need to watch out for bishop d3.
Yeah, bishop d3 is the idea. Knight, I guess knight d3 could be played here.
But I have to admit that that is a pretty brilliant move. And the main purpose of that is to fill the d3 square. Yeah, knight d3 looks menacing, hits b2, hits f2, but much scarier was bishop d3 to dislodge the rook's defense. And so you're willing to give up b2. You're not willing to give up f2. And if knight takes b2 now, perhaps just rook to c1, try to trade off a pair of rooks. And again, the a3 pawn wants to dart down the board with the help of those minor pieces.
Yeah, and now, I mean, not playing b6 from Lars is maybe just trying to keep the position too tactical, because he had a positional approach there. b6, solidify, secure those pawns, and then go forward against White's weaknesses. But here it's like everything is just getting traded left, right, and center. We've talked about discovered checks a lot this match. Knight takes f2, everybody takes, and there's no good check again.
That's right. You know, another example of that. And if that's the case, and the pawn f2 isn't directly under attack, I was going to say, can you push the b pawn? And the f2 pawn, though, this is so rich, this position. Is losing f2 the end of the world? Or is it just, hey, if you take on f2, you're also sort of stuck? Because I would like to trade one pair of rooks from White's perspective, because then your attack won't checkmate me. And Black would love to put that rook on f8 down on d2 or on b2, whatever, and take on f2. You want to mow down the 7th rank, but that's not happening. So I think that you're okay giving up that pawn, even if it's not preferable. And then that a3 pawn, watch out for it.
Yeah, it's almost like if the knight could take on f2 and you could sort of get this e pawn going, that would be ideal. But it's not that easy to do, because I mean the rook stops this pawn very easily. And remember, these rooks are not both on the 2nd rank, right? So there's no discovered checks. There's nothing like this. In fact, they're not really coordinated that well at all.
Actually, I like a little knight journey here for White. Knight d4, the rook moves to d2, then knight to e6. The rook moves to stay defending the knight on f2, then knight f4, blocking the rook's defense of that knight and hitting the bishop on g6. So this could actually turn south very quickly for Lars here.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you have to choose f6 because you have to defend this bishop. Otherwise, you might even just be losing a piece after knight f4.
Right. And now I think that Alina has a choice. The c7 pawn was hanging, but she plays knight f4. And now look at this knight d5. The pawn moved, opening the bishop's defense of the d5 square, hitting the rook, hitting the e3 pawn. Rook e6 defends the pawn. Or, well, can I still capture it? Because the knight on f2 loses defender. This is just great knight hopping.
Yeah, this is beautiful. Alina, she played it on a dime too. She had that whole pattern, that whole route mapped out. She was ready for e3, knight d5, boom. And it's like this knight on f2, it looks so menacing, but she's unfazed. It's right beside her king. There's some threats, but she says, look, it doesn't matter. I've been moving one piece the last 4 moves and exposing the lack of coordination in Black's camp.
And look at the last moves 24 through 28, these last 5 moves. Knight b3, knight d4, knight e6, knight f4, knight d5. That knight came from a5 and then just said, hey, I'm going to go 3 squares over there to d5. That took a long journey, but she did it with tempo after tempo. And now the final tempo is just so powerful, hitting this rook on f6, this pawn on e3. White is winning material, and then that a3 pawn can finally shine, and the bishop is open all the way down to the edge of the board.
Yeah, and this is crunch time for Lars. There's knight e7, there's knight e3, all sorts of good moves here. Yeah, get rid of that pawn immediately.
And by the way, the knight on e3 protects the bishop on g2. So even if Black is somehow able to throw that rook on f8 down on b2, the knight covers the bishop. So it's not even a huge threat at the moment. So just move the rook to e1. I like defending the knight. King h8, and now a4, a5, a6. A7,
yeah, the
A8.
question is, why does this not just win? That's basically what she's asking herself right now.
But don't ask for too much longer. Because
yeah, exactly. We've seen this before. Remember, this is actually going to be the last game, right, of the 5-minute portion. That's so right. If she goes in to the break with a 2-game lead, that'll be the first 2-game lead of the match. It'll be super, super important.
She could have had a 3-1 lead. Remember, she lost on time in the 4th game heading into the break. So this would be the first 2-game lead of the match. You're correct. And, well, look at that knight on g4, rook coming down to f2. This is starting to look a bit uncomfortable. So she needs to find several accurate moves. And if she's able to, then she should have the huge advantage. So
I assume the knight's going to go back. Yeah.
I was also thinking, could you bring that rook down to f2 from f8 and try to checkmate along the 2nd rank?
Yeah, I think for now with 14 seconds, he's maybe going to repeat and use the time that Alina is spending to think, because he knows, I think, that Alina wants to play for the win here. That's been the case. That's the direction the game has been going. But time ticking down, we have seen Lars excel in these situations.
And looks like she's willing to repeat moves. He's thinking he's trying to play for a win, perhaps, because he hasn't moved it. There it is. You cannot take on g4. Well, you can, but after a move like bishop takes f1, you cannot take back on f1 because that's your typical checkmate with rook g2, rook h2. Okay, what's happening here? Bishop.
This is getting so dicey.
Bishop f5, g6. Oh, wait, the bishop was hanging. I thought it was mate for white all of a sudden. The bishop could be captured. Okay, so rook f2. Okay, you need to save your king. And now rook a8, and the pawn is just trying to run.
Now Alina is not worried about like getting mated or losing this game because she's done a good job containing the rooks. I think rook c2 and
great move.
Yeah, she's going to be up a pawn here. Should be a draw, but she's done a great job. She's done as much as she can, and only she has the winning chances here.
Although with the time the way it is,
rook b2 maybe.
And rook b2, g5, g4. You're kind of trying to checkmate the white king.
Get a little scary there.
After the game, I would like to highlight that rook c2 moment.
Oh, rook b2? What?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that would have turned things around real quick. h4 shot. Wait, h4 put the king in
winning the game.
It put the king in a mating net.
Oh no, she could like lose this now.
Yeah, but I cannot wait to analyze this though. She could lose this after king h3.
Rook check.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, and king back.
The rook h8 check was a threat. h3, that wins.
King g3, and then king takes.
Yes, take, and then just your king moves out king f6, and then the rook check is a threat to get a queen.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. h4.
Runs. Run. That's GG.
Yep, and now rook g8.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Or sorry, excuse me, not anywhere.
That's true. That's true. Actually, that was the only square the rook could move to in the game.
It was like anywhere. Oh yeah, just the only move on the board. Rook anywhere, obviously.
Oh, well, let's just analyze very quickly a couple of those moments. If you don't mind, Amon, we can go back to the moment where showing rook c2. And I think that was a really instructive moment because I think most of us are so focused on our a3 and b4 pawns that we tunnel. We're like, oh, my pawns are under attack. But the problem is you are going to lose one of these pawns regardless. A3 is under attack. And if you play rook f3, then rook takes b4 happens, and your a8 rook isn't defended. So you are losing a pawn by force on that from those two files. So she plays rook c2, giving up one pawn to go up a pawn up ending. And then, I mean, as we go forward from there, Amon, you could take the wheel because there was like a checkmating net for white and also for black. It was wild.
This was, I mean, the evaluation bar is just going up and down all over the place. So rook b8 was the first, I would call it a pretty serious mistake because I think you should just throw in h3 check, kick that king back. And the reason is that black can throw in the check here. This is what Robert and I were both gasping at because you always want to check and force your opponent's king back where possible. So rook check, the king would have to go back somewhere here, and then king h3. There's never going to be any checks to that king. And if you're not careful, all of a sudden you might be losing both of these pawns as white and maybe get into some trouble. So that was missed. And then b7. So now whenever the pawn is there, Robert, it's all about, hey, can this rook ever move anywhere with a check? Because that'll always be winning.
Right. And then when rook b4 was played, which was a big mistake, h4 check is beautiful. And the point is, if you go to f6 or h6, I simply give you a check. And then my pawn promotes with the defense of the rook. I go up a rook. And if you have king to g4, because that's the only other move that doesn't allow a check, it's the only move, rook f8. And if you take the pawn, there's rook f4 checkmate. The king is ensnared in a mating net, and there's nothing black can do to avoid it because the best you can do is give up your rook for that pawn to avoid the mate. But I don't even think you're getting that far. Just really beautiful stuff there. And I saw it, I had the idea in my head, but then the eval bar went poof, and I was like, okay, it has to be h4, and the mating net there is just devastating.
That's like a one you might find in Puzzle Rush. Absolutely.
Yeah. And
but yeah, that game was just wild. That was probably the biggest miss that we saw there in that one. And Robert, it's going to be that 2-point lead as we go into the break from the 5-minute portion. I mean, what are your thoughts on the match we've seen so far? Because every game, it feels like the time scrambles that we're seeing are so intense every single time.
For sure. And I think if you're Alina Kashlinskaya, you have to be very happy that you just won a game in a time scramble, because in the back of your head, in a match with this kind of format, you're thinking bullet section, bullet section. Even if I'm up 3 games on the match score, what if I'm the underdog and my opponent just wins all those bullet games? But now you just proved to yourself and everybody watching that you can win a time scramble and you're not just going to make mistakes and fall apart. So that's great. She's up 2 games. Lars, he's right in the thick of this. This is not that big of a deal. She has to be the favorite at this point, in my opinion, but he is the favorite bullet player. And as we get to 3-minute Aman, I feel like his chances should start improving with the quicker time controls.
Yeah, though that's going to be the next stage, as we have the 3+1 portion of this match. The players are going to take a break as they get set for that, and Robert and I are going to do the exact same thing. So everybody calm down, and we'll be right back with the next portion after the break.
And while we're in the midst of an enthralling match, we should let everybody know that there is another great event coming up starting in February. It is the PogChamps 3. presented by Grip 6. It's going to be another great event featuring celebrities and popular streamers. You see here in the graphic in front of you, you have XQC returning for a third time. Ludwig makes his reappearance after starring as a commentator, Moist Critical, and we have a lot of first timers here. Mr. Beast, Myth, Rainn Wilson, yeah, you better known as Dwight Schrute, huh? Pokimane, Code Miko, and Daniel Negreanu, the poker legend, Michelle Khare, and of course, Logic, who is a fantastic rapper and also an avid chess player. So, Aman, any early favorites from your perspective, or anyone you're kind of rooting for, or just curious to see how they do?
Well, I think it's great that you got some of the favorites returning to the PogChamps tournament, but then you also have tons and tons of new people joining up. I know Logic has been streaming a lot of chess lately. I think that it's going to be interesting to watch the sort of outside Twitch participants, such as Rainn Wilson, such as Daniel Negreanu, such as Logic, take on the people who are more comfortable on Twitch and have been streaming a long time, like Myth, Pokimane, and all those streamers that we know. So I think that's going to be the most exciting thing to watch. Who's going to do better, Robert? It's the mini game. Is it the Twitchers or is it the people outside Twitch? So I'll be looking forward to that.
It's a great question. And what we're all looking forward to is the next part of this match. It is 3 minute plus a 1 second increment time control. Alina Kashlinskaya leads 5-3, and we're off. As soon as we start talking about it, the games have begun. Alina gets the black pieces again. And Aman, the question that I'm wondering is, what is Lars' first move going to be? We're back to a French.
Yeah, and he wants to give this one another go. There's no reason why he shouldn't be interested in that. And he's already switched the variation up, or I should say maybe Alina did. No, I think Alina played Bishop B4 last time. So it was Alina who changed the variation.
She did, and that's what happens when you are watching players of this caliber. And for everyone who's tuning in, like, why do they keep changing their openings? Is there something they don't like? They're capable of playing many different lines, and that keeps their opponents on their toes. Look at this, B6, then G3. Let's have a stare down the bishops with the knight in the way. And if we quickly show Bishop B7, Bishop G2, F5, it looks like, wait, that knight can't move. You lose the bishop on G2, but it can move with check. And that's why Alina starts with pawn F5, so she can be first to diagonal.
Yeah, and something seems a bit off here, if I can just say that. The F5, knight back, bishop B7, and does white have to play F3?
You could potentially play D5 and sacrifice a pawn. That is somewhat thematic, but F3 was played, and that I don't like.
This looks bad already. This is not good. There's almost like ideas like knight c6 or bishop f6 hitting the pawn. Knight e2 is not possible. And then if you castle, there's an idea of bishop to g5 pinning the queen. And if f4, you already pick up that rook in the corner.
Oh, such a good point. The castling queenside just could lose an exchange right away for.
And I think that's the idea.
Oh, that's no
knight
fun.
e2, pick that pawn up and castle bishop g5 is a real idea.
Wow. So that doesn't look good. So what? So rook d1 played.
Yeah, so there we go. We're already seeing the weirdness that this position is.
Yeah, this doesn't look great for white. And look at this. Because white's position has taken so much time just to get here, Alina castles, and that may seem like she's walking into a potential attack, but she has the bishop pair, and the bishop on f6 is unopposed and going to make use of these dark squares.
And I love the idea of queen c7 or queen c8 here. Not trading and instead keeping the position tactical. I think the dark squares for white, the only option being castle and kingside, are insanely weak. So queen c7 I was a fan of.
I also like that. And well, she's playing quickly. She is slightly ahead on the clock here. She's bringing her knight out. She's fully developed. And I didn't like the move castle, by the way. I think king f2 was more precise. We're in an endgame, so your king should be closer to the center. Now, it's not a pure endgame. There's still some attacking chances, but king f2 looked better to me than castling.
Right. Yeah, because, I mean, maybe you want to play king e1 at some point. Maybe the king goes to f1, but f2, it would already be defending that pawn. I can basically agree with you simply based on that, Robert. Imagine the king on f2. It'd just be better placed.
And we're probably going to see that in the near future, the king coming to f2. And look at this, knight f3 check, a possibility that wouldn't have been allowed had the king been on f2. Now black has the pair of bishops. But let me ask you something here. What can those bishops attack? The knights are defending each other. So can white just try to trade off the rooks and say, your bishops are kind of useless?
Yeah, I think in general the bishops should be a bit better in this endgame, but knights are so tricky in blitz, and I completely agree with the idea of just trading everything off there. And Alina agrees as well, because she says, no, that's not gonna fly here. Bishop c6, the d file is yours, but rook d6, maybe rook c8, kick that rook out immediately, and then regroup and bring the king towards the center.
This is a great lesson in knowing what pieces to trade. And both, Aman and I were kind of hinting at this. You do not want to trade all the rooks off. Alina says, yeah, I agree. Let's keep a rook on, because now this rook can poke and prod. Rook b8 hits the b2 pawn, maybe can jump into the b4 square and cause some problems for white. And though white is first to the punch on the d file, that rook is going to be kicked out, and then the king can walk to the center and look for h5, h4 on the other wing, and this rook on c8 will be valuable as the game continues.
And I think that black might consider a move like c4 at some point, because I was going to say with that pawn on a2, if white got c4, that would be ideal for his position. But now that we see bishop e6 with c4 coming, I'm really liking the way Alina is treating the bishop pair here.
Agreed again. And c4, there is b4 for white. You do not want to take that pawn on c4, because the rook on c8 will say, hello, good to see you here, and we'll win that one right back. So I think that white needs to keep the position closed there, but look at her playing on both sides of the board. Guess what? Bishops outclass knights when they're pawns on both sides. And for in the future, f6, e5, let's get a pass pawn right down the center.
Yeah, love the way that she's playing here. Black is just so much better. There's h4, there's c4. Now c4, there's no b4 move, which you pointed out, because a4 is hanging. So it could be time to get that move in.
And yeah, she's focused on the king side right now, and she wants to take on g3, play rook h8, get the rook down the line there, because the bishop on c6 covers the whole diagonal. And I just love the way she's doing this. It feels like white is just struggling to even come up with an idea here, and the bishops are promising and looking in all directions. Yeah, that's
a grimace from me. I do not like the look of c3. Just the rook on b8. It doesn't matter if it works now, works later. That is going to hurt white's position eventually.
Yep. And knight c4, bishop c7. You probably have to do something like knight c1 or rook to b2. But either way, f6 or bishop d5. Those are the moves that come to my mind here. And how can white continue?
Rook h8 too is a way to get all the way around the position.
Because the g3 pawn, that's why h5, h4 was played by Alina. g3 is the soft point now, rather than h2, which couldn't have been attacked. So rook g1, for instance, will force that king to f2, but then maybe there's rook g2 check. So actually, after rook g1, how do you defend g3?
Yeah, beats me. Rook g1 looks quite strong here. I mean, c5 is hanging, let's not forget. But after you play knight c5, I'm not too sure what the follow-up is.
Right. So
knight e5.
That's what I was about to say. But then bishop e8.
Yeah,
and just say, well, now bishop d5 is better, because there's no c4 to kick the bishop out. And, can you... Wait, rook d7! No!
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
What? It's still there! Oh, my gosh. And that's how a great position turns into a horrible one. Just losing sight of the d7 square.
Oh, my goodness. b3 is hanging. There's going to be endless checks here, by the way.
Wait. that was completely unexpected. I understand how this happens in a blitz game, but white's up a piece. Was there no way out?
No, you had to go to g1 and then play knight f1. No, I'm trying to think. How do you get out of that? Wait, sorry. Don't you just go to G1, H2, H3?
We can show on the analysis board real quick while this next game goes away.
That was weird.
Couldn't you also? Yeah, that's so strange.
What happens if you go all the way here?
I don't know.
Oh,
rook H1. So knight F1, which is what you said before, is good, because the knight E5.
Yeah, I was worried about F6 though.
But then knight C4 back to D2 or something like that.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, he didn't have much time though.
He didn't have much time, and honestly, that was the weirdest kind of draw, but it just sort of happened.
Well, this game should not be a draw, by the way. That one happened. Look at this position where we just tuned back in.
Yeah.
Bishop takes G6 and just checkmate in the next few moves.
By the time we figured out why that one was maybe drawn, this one's almost over by checkmate. So we got to be careful. These 3-minute games are going so much quicker than the 5-minute portion. And bishop g6, knight d5 is in the position. The queen to the h file. I mean, this has to be a good attack.
And simply knight takes d5, queen e6 check. You can just move your knight back to e3, so you can steal that pawn. And
you could even go knight e2 almost with like some bishop h7 trickery. I don't think it quite works, but I want your queen to take on d5, and then I have some bishop h7 checks, but
right,
it doesn't look like it's quite working.
So
he does go for it.
Yeah,
so she does go for it.
Yeah, she takes, and now knight e3 back, and she's, what's the material? I haven't even looked. Black only has 3 pawns left, and white currently has 5, so 2 extra pawns. But that's not the important part of this story. It's that the king on g8 lacks defenders, and after knight back to e3, white's next move will be knight to f3, and likely knight to g5, and good luck to your king on g8.
Yeah, it's a hilarious position. There's just no pawn. I talked about winning a game without any pawns. Well, black on move 16 has already given up 5 of them.
And this is the kind of thing you need to do if you're Lars, is somehow get some counterattack going. You're looking like you're getting checkmated on the king side. Can you try to muster up some counterplay? I don't see it. Just knight g5.
Yeah, knight g5. And I'm wondering where this queen ends up getting to. Queen e5, queen.
Oh, maybe, queen e5. There's no actual follow-up. I want to get my queen into the game for white, but I don't see a way forward. The knight on f6 is covering everything.
Yep.
So maybe we start with bishop f5, actually. Where's your queen going?
Yeah, it looks like f7.
then knight g5.
Then knight g5, and then bishop e6. That's game over.
Oh.
That's game over.
Oh, my goodness. And it was a process of elimination thing here. And she plays bishop f5. This is... You're winning the queen.
This is the type of moment where Alina's style of being so calculated and so precise is exactly what just wins her the game on the spot here. She's not playing knight g5 on a whim. She's saying, look, how do I absolutely crush this position? Bishop f5, she realized, is forcing bishop e6, and that is completely over.
Just as straightforward as it gets. And we tuned in sort of late to the game, but as soon as we first looked, we see, okay, it came from this kind of Benko gambit. Black is down some material, but normally that doesn't result in you getting checkmated in the first 20 moves. Yeah. In fact, black is the one who's supposed to be attacking because you give up pawns for quick initiative.
Yikes. And how do you think he's going to continue playing? Because it's either resign or you got to sack your queen for like the best amount of material possible.
No, there's your
resign.
Answer.
It's a resign.
It's one of those moments where you just give up. And the variation itself is one that is extremely dangerous because white just pushes all her pawns forward, and that's what happened. And we're back to here. Bishop f6, gf6.
Okay, he's not going to play g3 this time. There's no way.
No, you're right. No way.
That did not work out for him last time.
Not even a little bit. And here, it's another example of throwing in a check, which is met by an easy block, and then retreating the bishop because you close down the diagonal. And look at this. The bishop comes to f3, just like it was trying to go to on g2, except now you don't have to create problems on your king side. So your bishop's just nice and calmly here. Still, though, black can play f5, bishop f6, and I think this is a good position for black. And I can't believe I'm saying about that again, about a French on move 12.
I know. It's blasphemous, but the position is solid because c5 is going to happen at the right moment. f5 is always there. Long castle looks solid. I feel like f5 followed by c5 is really going to be a good position for Alina.
Yeah, and there's so many tactics as well. Knight to e5 for black. The rook on d8 says I'm winning the stare down with the queen all the way there on d2. And so there's a retreat. Knight e5 still speaks to me. Where's your bishop going? Maybe. Okay, she plays king b8. Still knight e5.
Still there. Knight e5, bishop e4. There's like f5 to follow up. Knight c4 or knight g4 in that position. Finally, we do see your move, Robert. You're getting some credit around here.
I'm feeling good about it. And now c5 feels powerful if the bishop leaves the f3 square. The only square you can go to is h5, which puts some pressure on the f7 pawn, but the knight on e5, it protects it. So it's not a threat right there. And I think you can play c5 and open all your pieces up. Although c5 is a bit dangerous because if black does play c5, there'll be knight b5 ideas for white. So just because we've been focused on it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go for it. And I would refrain, at least for the time being, from playing the move c6 to c5.
Yeah, it looks strange, but bishop h5 is probably exactly what white needs to do in this position. And queen e3 just feels like it has to be run.
Right. Queen d3 might run into bishop a6. Problems for that queen there. And queen c1. Speaking of having to be wrong, putting the queen back on c1. And look at Lars. You saw that? He just grabbed his head, threw his hair all over the place, and now is like, so when's it my turn? When do I get to start pushing you back?
Yeah, exactly. He's in full focus mode because I know it looks crazy, but I'm looking at queen takes h2. I'm just letting you know. I'm checking it out.
I actually was thinking the same thing. As soon as you move a piece, you think, what has changed? Well, the rook was defending h2. And Alina puts her king on a8. So what is her idea? Like, why is she putting her king all the way in the corner? There's never going to be some kind of rook usage on that side of the board. Like rook b8 doesn't add to the position at all. So I don't really fully grasp what she's been doing. And yet I still think her position is totally good.
Yeah, absolutely. Like knight d2, I understand what Lars is trying to do. He's just trying to trade things off. Like if these knights disappear and he gets c3 in, maybe g3, long term, that h pawn over there is something to worry about in an endgame. And if you ever play c5, I don't think that he's going to be too upset trading those light square bishops and getting rid of the bishop pair for Alina. So I understand what he's doing. He's saying, look, let's trade pieces because I don't have a lot of space, and this is really going to help me finally get to move.
And he takes with the rook. He didn't want to walk into any sort of pins. And bishop g5 was a threat, so rook d3 was played. And Lars is well ahead on the clock here. And queen h6 could come at any moment. So it's now all of a sudden the dynamic has changed completely. Queen h6 is what I would play here. Saying my queen sitting on c1, not doing all that much. But he sits on e3 instead.
Yeah, and I think he can throw in g3 at the right moment to sort of solidify everything. Also, knight c1 to b3 to c5 was an idea, and maybe what prompted Alina to play a5, say, look, a4, I'm going to control all these queenside squares so you can't use them.
Right. And I still like the queen going to h6, but perhaps, okay, rook d2, I'm trying to grasp what the idea here is, and one of the ideas I'm thinking about for white is playing rook c1, c3, but you didn't need to make those last few moves of g3 and rook back to d2. So I guess that's not what's going to happen, but I'm just looking at that c6 pawn as a potential target.
What do you think of c4 here? And then knight takes c3 with the idea knight a4 to knight c5. Anyways, king a1 was played, so I think he did want to do it, but I think he wants to take with the pawn.
Okay, well, that does make some sense. Although the b file doesn't look like a disaster, I wouldn't recommend opening it. It feels like it gives white too much play and easy play. And look at the clock situation. Lars is well ahead on time, so I would not want to make his life easy. So bishop a6 hits the c pawn. If c5, thank you for all of the light squares. Your pawn on d4 is permanently a target. So I think that, well, what do you do here really for rook c1, I guess? But I don't like that either.
Well, c5 and I don't know, knight f4 next or something. Knight c1. Knight c1 doesn't feel like the right one.
No.
I'll put it that way.
And I like this move bishop c4 a lot, saying that knight wants to get into the game. No. Yep. And I can play bishop d5 and look at your pawn on d4. I am stopping that pawn's progress entirely, and I'm going to pile all my pieces and try to win it later.
Knight takes e2, though. And suddenly that pawn is very well defended. And like rook d5, there's always knight f4.
Right. So the queen can go up to b5. It's just slithering into the position.
Yep.
What is queen h6 going to happen? Or is it never going to happen?
It might just never happen, but now it seems like a great opportunity to just throw it in there.
Right, because just like h2 was hanging in white's camp before, h7 maybe can be captured depending on how the game continues. This...
He wants to plant the knight on b3, just some stable square, which I totally understand. Knight b3, covered by the pawn, guards d4, and then maybe he's comfortable finally playing queen h6.
Yeah, I like this much more. Now, watch out for that c6 pawn. So she's just sort of moving. She's playing quickly. She's ahead in time now. And I do not like f4. I really don't like them. It locks in your queen, so there's no counter shot. Oh
And
gosh.
they each have, 20 seconds-ish apiece. There's pressure on d4, but honestly, this is a tough position to break through. Like maybe you run the king all the way to the king side or something and switch the rooks.
Okay, well, she's starting with the rooks. And then I like your idea, king d7, king e8, run over there. So queen f3 at least gives the idea of queen h5 at the right moment. But I would start running that king towards the king side, like you said.
Yeah.
Wait,
Oh,
wait.
okay.
Queen
Maybe she
takes...
didn't notice that queen on e2 hit the queen on b5. I feel like she didn't notice that.
Is the king about to walk in? King d5.
I
Oh
think
my
it is.
gosh. Yeah, it is. And
Rook a8.
I almost want to play king e4 there, by the way. But I
h5. We're waiting for this. h5, h4, by the way.
King c4. Talk about unnecessary king moves, but she's protecting the pawn on b4. And
you can tell Lars wants to play this position. He doesn't want to draw. Yeah.
But I think he's worse, and I see the evaluation bar says as much.
Check.
Okay.
And rook b5, c7, all ideas.
So winning the b pawns, losing the c pawns, but now the d4 pawn stays, and look at the king. Look at that king.
Oh,
Here
man.
it comes.
King e4, king f3. Oh no, this is a nightmare king.
I actually have no idea who's better here. Like, this is. I think I'd rather be black. It just seems trickier for white to deal with this.
King d1.
Oh, bishop b4 was a mistake. Rook a6 to cement the pawn in the dark square was better.
That's a great point. Yeah. Now the light square pawn is safe. Rook b3 is the idea, but king e4 is fine.
Oh, look at that clever move, shutting the rook off so you can win the pawn on a6. King.
Oh, knight c1 to b3. Oh, king c2 can't be right.
No, that.
Oh, no, bishop b6. Now he's lost.
Bishop takes d4 and king f3 blunders the bishop. Don't play king f3. Wait, the knight's just trapped. f6. The knight's completely stuck. There's no move.
And then e4 is going to win the knight. It's completely stuck. It's over.
Oh my gosh! Wait, it's the wrong h pawn. So if you could somehow, you have no way to do it. But
just had to get in there and point out it was the wrong wrong color h.
You never know when that will make its presence felt. So it seems like we are actually getting a break right midway through the time control. The players get to take a step back, think about what's happened, and I think Alina is going to be happy because she has won 2 more games to take a 4-game lead. So, Mon, before we go on break, any sort of thoughts on what Lars can do to right the ship here?
Yeah, can we talk about that for a sec? Like, hang on, isn't Alina undefeated? Lars has to go back and really recalibrate in this 3-minute portion. So I'm really excited when we come back to see if he's going to change anything, because it's just not working at all for him right now, Robert.
It really isn't. Even when he's up on time, things still are going Alina's way. She's kind of outplaying him, so all credit to her. We will be back shortly for more 3-minute plus 1-second action from this I'm Not a GM Strategist Championship match brought to you by Chess.com. And we return. Alina Kashlinskaya has opened up a 4-game lead over Lars Hauge. Aman, it's really tough sledding out there for Lars. And during the break, we were kind of joking around, but how does he right the ship? How does he correct the mistakes he's been making? Does he need to play a different opening, which he seems to be doing every game, or what? I don't know.
Well, some of the openings in particular that I felt have not been going his way, especially the new French line. I think he needs to examine that because the line that Alina is now going for, where it's getting these double pawns and playing b6, I think it's really working out for her. So I would stay away from that line going into the rest of this 3-minute portion, and especially in the bullet, it's going to be more pronounced if you really don't have a clue what to do. So I would stay away from that. I think that the Dutch is still very viable. He's been going for that, but as I say that, he decides to switch that up. And is it going to be a Grunfeld, King's Indian? It looks like he's going for King's Indian as he comes out of the break with, again, something brand new.
Zero surprise that he's going for an aggressive opening. And the King's Indian, if you look at it from this point of view, the bishop on g7 is stuck behind some pawns, but it gives you chances to open up the board later. And this g4 line is one that says f5. Good luck making that work, because I'll take with my g pawn, and then my rook will come to g1, and your bishop on g7 will be pinned to the king. So this is just a way to clamp down on the position. I think very smart choice by Alina.
And I mean, I might need some brushing up on my theory here, but knight b6 looks like a extremely peculiar move, especially because oftentimes when you play this, the idea is, hey, you make white play b3. Sometimes that weakens the diagonal. It's not what you want to play, but white was going to go knight e2, knight g3, no matter what. And knight b6 just, I mean, it looks really misplaced to me.
It is very misplaced. And black's best move is pawn e5 back to e6. Right? You need to open up this position that opens up your bishop, but also allows you to start chiseling towards the center. Knight c5, good for you. It attacks nothing. h4 says, I'm going to play h5. I'm going to play bishop h6. I'm going to trade dark square bishops, and I'm just going to checkmate you on the king side.
I have no idea what Lars is planning here, because there's not even a b5 in the position. a4 threatens nothing. f5 is just non-existent because white's just going to take everything, and you can't give up your light squares like that. So this is like, oh, this is so bad, Robert.
No, yeah, it hurts to kind of look at here, but is the idea to go king f7 and run the king somehow? Is there a way to king f7, rook h8, bring your other rook over, and then run? But the problem is there's also a timely bishop takes c5 to then play d6.
h6. Oh, and that bishop, Robert, is not playing chess for the rest of this game. You mark my word.
No. And you can take on c5 and play d6 and just open up the center, because you're playing a piece down as black. Your bishop is caught in the corner. And I would probably go for something like that. It's not necessary, and that's why Alina is not doing that. But, I mean, what does black do here?
It's so bad, because I think what she's going to go for is the more maybe traditional approach: b3, a3, king b2, b4, maybe bring this knight to e3, bring a knight to f5, and she's just going to take her time, as she knows this is an absolutely crushing position.
Yes, one of these positions, and we often suggest it's the good thing to do, is what is your opponent's plan if they had a couple free moves? Not just take all the pieces, but what actual plan that isn't just relying on an opponent's mistake. And black does not have any plans here because your pieces are all stuck. The e4 and g4 pawns mean that f5 is impossible. And if f5 is impossible, your pieces over there that are just lumped together on the king side doing absolutely nothing.
So if I'm going to talk about a plan, knight g6, knight h4, queen takes h6. Trying to snag that pawn and just go back and at least free yourself over here. And a4 played because b4 c5 is so crushing that he says, look, I know I might lose this pawn at some point. It's quite possible, like bishop c5, bishop c2, queen d1, but I'd rather play a4, get that in, follow up with b6, and just see what happens.
And another thematic idea for white is to think about knight to b5 and say, you can take my knight over there, but once I take with a c pawn, my rook is happy, my rook can go to c4. The a4 pawn is the target here. And while she goes for the exact thing you were talking about, queen back to d1, can you play queen e8 and defend there?
I was thinking about queen e8. I guess here you sort of have to decide, are you going to go knight h4 and focus on liberating your bishop, which is what has happened, or are you going to go queen e8 and focus on trying to keep the queen side closed?
I guess one of the major issues that if queen was played, the knight f5 happens, and your bishop is just frozen. The bishop on d7. You can take on f5, but then you'll lose a4 eventually. So there was no choice. You were losing this a4 pawn, and I like this, all things considered. Just saying, I'm going to try to win h6. So I would take on c5, I think, and then take on a4, and just say, I don't care about the h pawn, but she's too strong. Knight f5.
She's too strong. Just too strong. She takes, and remember, if pawn takes from the g file, there's definitely a world where there's like a sack on g5 to mate the black king.
Sacks on g5, sack on h4. The king is bottled up over there, right? She takes with the e pawn, so she wants to take on c5 and then put her knight on e4 at some point.
Exactly.
That's just a beautiful positional way to play. Whereas you and I were both like, let's go for checkmate. Why not?
Yeah, where's the mate?
So if you move the knight takes f3 becomes a possibility for black because the bishop on a4 need defense. That's why she wisely retreats her bishop. And look at this, knight g2. I like that move.
Yeah. So, I mean, say what you want, but I think that Lars's position has actually improved. And I don't believe, knight e2 is there, maybe even to go to d4 rather than take the rook.
Right. That's what I was actually looking at.
Yeah. This is not so bad. He gets h6 and rook slides over. I mean, he's holding.
Especially when time trouble ensues. I mean, there's no knockout. And that's the big problem, is once you play h6, it looks horrible. That bishop on g7 is a pawn, but it's a good pawn. You're protecting. This is what Danya says often, and it is an expression. Bad bishops defend good pawns. And that pawn h6 will save your king. The pawn on f6 keeps everything together, e5 and g5. So it isn't that horrible.
Yeah. At the right moment, bishop f8, maybe h5 and rook h7. I like h5, rook h7, slide the queen over, and bishop d6, and you complete your building blocks over here. But I really think h5, just got to go for something like that. Maybe rook h7 to preface it.
King h8 I don't like. Putting your king to make h5 more difficult, I'm not a fan of. And okay, knight takes d5. So that is probably what king h8 was played.
Yeah.
So there are no pins. There's no queen b3 pin.
Can we make use of it at least? The king h8 move and go knight d5? What's wrong with that?
I think that Alina will say, you know what? I'll take it and open the board up. Your bishop on f8 still stinks. So look at this. She trades rooks off and says, hey, how's that bishop feel? It's not on h8 anymore, but it's not that much better on f8.
Right. I think you take and go h5. Yeah, take this and go h5. Like, I think you just need to.
Wait, knight takes f6? Knight f6? That's
queen a4.
And queen b3 as a response. And that's an important pawn. But this is also good.
Rook f7 though. Oh.
Wait, so you can't go queen in because queen a4 check.
Yep. There's going to be queen c6 as well, lurking in the position. King g7. Once that happens, anything goes here. Queen b5 is how black gets involved.
Oh, look at that move though.
No.
Oh, is knight g3, knight h5 coming? Does that just?
I like queen b3.
Oh, queen b3 looks good. Rook d1. So does rook d7? Because queen e2 check, there's knight d2. So then knights are excellent defenders against queen checks very often.
King's going to safety.
Rook takes c7, I say, with no comp. What? Rook takes f6?
The queen's covering.
Oh my gosh. Now black is just ahead.
And that's it. The queen exchange. And rook f7 to follow, or rook takes c6.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You know, if you lost the c pawn, there would be some chances for white to hold because the h pawn's the wrong.
Bishop g7, and it's over. f6, rook f6. The rook is trapped. The rook is completely trapped. It went from black's bishop being trapped on h8, Robert, by a pawn on h6 defended by the rook on h1, to the rook on h1 being trapped by the bishop from h8. That is just terrible karma.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but you have to give Lars so much credit for fighting until the very end. This dude does not go down without clawing his way back into any sort of counterplay. Like even the smallest bit of counterplay, he latches onto, and he flagged Alina one game, and he just won that game where, I mean, frankly, he didn't really have any business taking that full point.
Nope. Absolutely none. That was incredible. That game was like +4 from the opening without any material imbalance, Robert. That's incredible.
Not only was there no imbalance, not a single piece had been traded.
Oh,
right? It's just, oh my gosh. And well, look at this game. Alina is up a pawn right now because Lars sacrificed one, and I'm not sure I'm buying it. I feel like this was a questionable decision out of the opening already for Lars. I see the eval bar off to the side says -1, but sometimes -1 positions are very difficult for black to play. I don't really have the sense that this is that hard for black to move forward in.
Yeah, I was gonna say you sort of have to decide between moving this e-pawn or not. Like you can try to develop around it. But she says, look, I don't see any issue with this. Sometimes the problem with this is bishop b5 check and taking on e6. But in this position, there's always queen a5 picking up that bishop potentially. Yeah, there's gonna be a check, but I think you can just block it. And then here you go queen a5 check, and there's no knight c3, which there usually is in positions where you have this tactic.
Such a good point that the knight is not on the board to help you out here, but bishop c4. So if you take on d5, queen takes d5, stairs in both directions at f7 and the b7 pawn and e4 as well. So in 3 directions, that's not good. So taking is not going to be played. Probably queen f6. I was thinking queen b6, but queen f6 is way stronger, hitting b2, hitting f4, protecting e6. And
he says, I do not care about b2, but
yeah,
is he overlooking b5?
Yes, he did. The bishop's trapped.
Bishop's just trapped. You take on e6. It's actually, is it just pawn takes that e6?
Yeah.
It looks weird, but take away that d5 square.
Yep. And I was going to recommend e5 first from black to then go b5 because that way your king wouldn't look less safe. But this works. You're just winning a piece. And
smokes.
I don't think Lars can believe it. Look at his face right now. He's just kind of like, is this right?
Is this really? Yeah, is this really trapped right now?
And he was the one going for tricks, and yet he gets tricked because that bishop stuck.
And it's funny because he sacked that pawn on e4, but it's that pawn which is making the bishop trapped.
It's a hero. You know, not the one that maybe Alina deserved, but the one she needed in this game. It just keeps that bishop locked in, and this is resignable.
Yeah, it is. It's getting, we talk about, you know, that +4 that Alina had in the last game, no material imbalance. This is -4 because there's going to be a material imbalance.
And I'll say that this is some evidence of having good nerves for Alina, because in the last game, she was really just cruising to a victory. She lost, but then she bounces back. It's a weird opening that you don't see every day, and yet she's handled it perfectly, finding moves like b5, and this is just a position she's up a piece and should not fear at all.
Absolutely. Knowing myself, I would probably play e3 here because I'm scared.
I'm with you. And it's funny, Aman, because you and I talked about this before the show even started. We were just, hanging out and chatting. Like sometimes we give too much respect to our opponents where we see a potential attack. We're like, no, I'm just going to close things down. And I think e3 was a great move, but perhaps it wasn't even necessary at that point. But I like it. I would have played the same.
Safe, and all the pieces are coming in. Remember, you can't castle without blundering that bishop on d7. No doubt she's conscious of that. Rook d8 is a move that comes to mind. Knight e4 is obviously what Lars is up to here, hitting the pawn, sort of eyeing that d6 square. But I think there's a lot of reasons why that's not the end of the world.
Yeah. And knight d4 is saying, I'm not going to hang that bishop, and I'm going to close down the d file. It does make sense, but white's next move will be c3. The c5 pawn is hanging. There's actually some chance here for Lars, and now they're heading towards a minute and less, and Lars already below a minute, but this is where mistakes happen.
Right.
Knight takes f3 check is the threat, by the way.
That's a nice one. So c3, just knight takes f3, handles that, because otherwise c3 looks so logical here.
Yeah.
That's important. Knight takes f3, and that's why bishop takes was played, but you have to think here, after rook d8, the king is going to get castled, and that's the magic thing. As soon as the castling happens, you feel like Alina's out of the water.
Although white now has 2 pawns for the piece, so it's not as clear as it felt some moves ago. The bishop on d7 is hanging. Behind that, the bishop on e7 is hanging. And look at this move, queen e8. That is the move that was needed to keep everything tied together. Take on d6, move your bishop away from d7, start trading some pieces. You are up a minor piece for just a couple pawns. Oh, she goes out there.
Wow.
Brave move.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely.
Knight b7 would make me a bit concerned. Okay.
Yeah, she just has full confidence.
Look at that. Queen went from e8 to b5, but not directly. It went back to h5 and then to b5. That's clever.
So impressive to come up with this, because this is a better version than giving up the bishop for the knight. But she comes up with this like it's, clockwork. I'm very impressed by that maneuver.
For sure. And Lars brings his queen back to e3, bishop c8. Finally, at long last, we can start trading some pieces. And now your extra piece makes his presence felt.
Absolutely. Bishop to maybe a6 or b7. Yep. Takes, rook d3s. Always in the position.
I like that. Bishop b4, okay. Watch out for some kind of knight f6 check, though, right? Not now, but some kind of knight f6 to shadow your pawn structure, try to get checks against the king. Not too many pieces defending that black king. Doesn't look like it's under attack, but it could be.
Yeah, that's a good point. Rook c7 is always going to fail to queen d1 check, although bishop d3 is...
Knight f2. Oh, no.
This is getting funky.
Oh, no, that's a pin, and you can't
15 seconds.
Oh, gosh. Not again. That's what she's thinking right now, because it's only a 3-game lead.
7 seconds ticking down, Robert.
Oh, my gosh. And takes on d3.
There's queen e6.
That's what I was wondering. Can you throw on queen e6 check here?
Yes, and there's queen e4.
Right. Very important.
Queen e8. Oh, no.
Queen e8. Not queen e8 because the queen on a4 covers, but this check, take on d3. Oh, my gosh. Lars is not
he's the favorite to win
yet, but he's well on his way.
This looks very winning.
Wow, queen d5. What a brave move. And what a good move, I might add. Okay, we see a repetition. H4, good move.
H5.
Wow. Where's the win here?
King h3, g3, maybe something like that.
Okay.
Queen d3. Queen c2.
Queen d3 looks good. But then queen h1 check and take on e5. At some point, black can likely take that knight and try to hold that. But with
queen e2 maybe.
Knight g6. It's mate. Oh, wait. Queen h5. Queen h5 won the knight.
Oh my God.
Queen h5 would have won the knight, and she lost some time. Oh, it hurts so bad. It hurts.
Robert, there were chances for both sides to win that. Yeah, of course, up a piece from the opening. Can we talk about the resilience from Lars? I know we were crediting the technique from Alina, but he turned an opening blunder of one entire piece at the international master level into a game that was not only competitive, but that he was even favorite to win. So impressive.
Is just incredible. And if you're Alina, now, I was saying, her nerves are great, but now your nerves might be frayed and you're just angry because you have been winning several games in a row now. You're still up 2, so you should take some solace in that fact. But I would be fuming at this point. Just like, how can I not beat this guy? I'm up a full piece. And the game before that, the bishop was trapped on h8, and yet that bishop beat me. So, frustration.
So many things that if there's one thing that I truly believe is in Alina's favor right now, it is, short-term memory loss. Like, I don't think she is thinking the way that you and I are probably thinking, that she's like, reflecting on the last game. I don't know, like you're saying she might be rattled. I don't think she's that kind of player. And, that's just to her credit if she can always focus on the next game. But you just have to feel at some point everybody is susceptible to that.
For sure. And she actually has another very good position. I'll say that much because, wait, the pawn d4, you take that, then d5, the position opens up. Which way is your king going? Neither side is safe. So Lars, wait, knight takes d5, free pawn. f6. I was trying to go f6 and e5, but somehow Lars figured this out. He said, I will lose a pawn, but then d4 is hanging at the end.
That's actually not that bad.
Yeah, what? Clever guy. Very clever.
Lars is, he's always combing his hair back as if he's about to put it in like a top knot or something. But it's like just short enough that it's not possible, but it's long enough that he's constantly has to comb it. So very, very relatable things, Robert, as we get into the world of, hair and grooming and all that.
And Alina is locked in right now. I mean, you look at her, it's what happens to all of us when we're playing on camera. At first we think, okay, this is the position I'm going to be in the entire time. And then you start slipping, and you're like, next thing you know, your forehead's right against the camera because you're staring so intently at the computer screen. And wait a second, couldn't she have moved her bishop out of the way first and then uncorked a discovered attack with a rook on d1 and that queen on d6?
Definitely yes. I think there would have had to have been like some sort of queen e5 move or something like that, because I agree. If the bishop moved, there was just knight b6 check.
I still like the position for white. I would play f4 here and then try to play e5. I know it cost me my f5 pawn, but I don't really care about that one. So I think I'd play f4 e5 for white.
Yep. The worry here is that if there's no immediate crush for white, I think black is just better with the bishops, especially in an endgame. So I like that f4 move. It pushes the tempo.
Yeah, and g takes f5 is a very difficult move to play, knowing that e5 is coming and it ruins your pawn structure as black, but e5 is happening whether you like it or not, and so you just have to accept that fact.
And it's played. So the question is now, where do you put that queen? Queen e6 is the greedy way to play. You try to hang on to that pawn, but knight g3 says, no, that's not happening.
This is starting to look quite nice again for white. So I'm trying to think long term here. Isn't this knight just better than the bishop for now, but the pawn on f4 perhaps could be a target later? Or in the fact that the bishop on b6 covers g1, well, not anymore, but that could have been useful if black ever was able to seize control with rook g8. I don't know.
a3, like that move. Just taking the time out, because look what happened. Queen c8, rook takes d7. It's almost like you got a free a3 move in there, and that's so useful.
I agree with you there, and that just make sure that the king won't fall victim to some kind of background checkmate. But I still don't know how white proceeds from here. And I'm looking at that h7 pawn and thinking, well, is the rook on h8 kind of tied down? Because if it moves, then my queen will open up an attack over there. But I don't see a useful knight move right now. Knight d6, of course, comes to mind, but maybe then that allows the queen to go into g4 or something like, well, speaking of queen g4.
Yeah, it's possible now. Hitting the knight, hitting the pawn, rook g8, knight e4, and h6, but knight c5 there.
Oh, knight c5 was excellent. She was focused on that f6 square, but knight c5 going queen b3, threatening checkmates, threatening knight d7 check, all that stuff.
Wow.
I'm with you there.
Is it time for, I was going to say a6.
Wait, no, knight d7. Knight d7. You can't go king b7 because knight c5. b5 was a blunder. Yeah.
And he knows he's blundered.
Yeah, that was a big slip.
I mean, bishop d8 literally forced here, but there is going to be some sort of checkmate on the board. Knight b6, pawn takes, queen d8, rook d7, and I think you see that one as well. But she did not.
And I see the evaluation bar go down because queen f5 check and then rook d3, the only way to survive. I mean,
oh my goodness, knight b6 was like just screaming. Knight f6 is actually a major blunder here if he finds queen f5. Not played, and Alina remains in control.
Yes, because the bishop is still stuck back there. The black king is open, and the h-pawn is now a passer.
Yeah, queen f5 and rook d3 is tough to spot.
Very. And I always admit this. I quickly looked over and I saw that the evaluation bar shrunk. I'm like, what in the world could it possibly, how could this be equal? Yeah. You need some kind of counter. So I thought queen f5 check, but I'm like, that doesn't do anything. And then rook d3. Wait.
Rook a3 could be some wild move. Queen b3 hits the rook as well with rook g2. Yeah, he does go for rook a3. This is very interesting.
Yeah, you would love to move your queen out the way and get a new queen, but queen a2 check is happening. This is scary for Alina.
Yeah, this has really been blundered. It's quite possible white loses this game as well.
And look at the evaluation bar. It just
queen f5.
Oh, queen f5.
Queen f5 is so nasty with rook a1, and he knows he's got the win here. There's rook a1, there's queen takes f4. It all looks good for black.
Yes, and this is going to be the third game in a row where Lars Hauge looked like he was dead lost. He had nothing going for him, but he fights till the very end, and he is going to take this game. Unbelievable stuff, frankly.
I think you just take that rook, let the queen happen, regroup, and then start rook f1, rook d3, and the checks from there.
Yeah, rook f1, king to e4, queen e2. I mean, there has to be a.
I think you just ladder the whole way across the board.
Yeah, queen g2, rook h1. There's speaking of ladders.
Mate in two, and wow.
And we still have time for one more game, and I feel like that is not good news for Alina because she probably could use a break right about now. Losing 3 straight games, and Lars once again goes for some kind of offbeat opening here.
Oh,
And
do you know what this one is? This is isn't this the ortho schnapp or something?
That's what it says. I didn't know what it was called, but I see French defense, Steiner, ortho schnapp gambit. And I'm like, does that mean I'm about to get my teeth fixed? And is what's happening here?
Yes, this is the one that I mean, I think Jonathan Schrantz had the video on this first. I know that Eric Rosen has some videos on this, but I can't remember who did it first. Anyways, both of those guys love making videos on super creative openings. And the idea is exactly this. You just play knight f3, castle, knight c3, and look at the insane amount of development and compensation. It's just a very fun way to play. So I'm really excited we're seeing this in the match.
Yeah, it rivals only the Jerome Gambit in terms of it just uniqueness and just its allure. So here, Black is up 2 pawns, but the king is in the center. F7's under attack. How does Black castle? You're not going to be able to castle, are you?
No. Basically, the answer is no. I think that after d3, taking it already invites a tough position. I think Lars is extremely happy with what he's got. He's almost pre-moving rook e1, if not for d2 or something. But this looks incredibly good for white, and I think rook e1, king f8, knight c3, or bishop g5. I mean, he is doing very well here.
Yeah, the really bad news for Alina is that she's cleared out the pieces in between her king and her rook on the king side, but now she's had to move her king, and the queen side remains underdeveloped. So bishop takes f6 may seem too scary to allow, but I think you just have to. And then your king gets the g7 square to run. So I think all things considered, knight c6 was a good choice. And if I'm Lars, I want to just play like knight c3, rook a d1, get all my pieces in. But knight a5 is currently an idea for Alina. And
yeah, I think knight a5, he's, I guess, going to meet it with queen takes d3.
Yeah, I guess. Just say, yeah, whatever. I'm getting 1 pawn back, and I still have the initiative.
There might be queen c3 and bishop f6, though. Oh, I thought he was throwing in bishop f6.
He could have, but he said, nah, let's just do this. I like that idea, though. Bishop takes f6 for sure. Because now
there's going to be...
great tactic. c6, yes. Knight d6, queen d6, bishop e7 check. That is
beauty.
So sick. You should show
me.
And
I think that she was planning on playing c6 and now has to rethink things. Because she maybe noticed this at the last second. The pin there and the fork there.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you want to think what changes with every single move. Well, in that case, the d6 square wasn't covered. The queen was loose, so you just need to remove the piece in between the queens that were staring each other down. Now that you've played f6 and c6, the e6 square is weaker. That's where white would like to take advantage of, but you have a bishop on c8. So I feel like Alina's a couple moves away from finishing her development, coordinating her pieces. And I'm not trying to claim she has an advantage necessarily, but king f7 comes to mind right now and doesn't look as bad.
Yeah, I'm looking at bishop g3 to get rid of that bishop and threaten knight e5.
I like that.
Keep in mind, if you move the rook, I know people have not been taking h7 pawns this match, Robert, but queen takes h7.
Knight e5 check. Knight e5.
Game over. We mentioned that tactic. And now it's happened without sacrifices necessary. That's going to be game over. And that's going to be the end of the portion. And look at the difference. It was like 3-0, like from Alina, 4-0, I think, before the break. And all of a sudden, it's come back and look at this. It's a tied match. What the heck is going on, Robert?
Yeah, she was up 4 games, and now Lars is giving me some like Joel Kinnaman vibes because he's just killing it right now, and she just can't handle it. I mean, every single game, well, with the exception of this last one, she's had an advantage, and yet he's come back and won. So I'm going to ask you before we go to break, what can Alina do to correct what's happening here because she's losing her lead?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what exactly Lars did differently from the break that has caused him to get all these wins. But honestly, it's just been tenacity. Like, he hasn't gotten the best position. So this game was an outlier. I think this was a fantastic game. But in general, he hasn't gotten the best positions, but he's so tenacious. He stays in there, even blundering a full piece in the opening. I think that his key right now is play fast, take those slightly worse positions, and then, stay in the game. And his time scrambling, we got to give him some credit there. So Alina, great chess. and just slows down at the end. We'll have to see if she can right the ship in bullet, because we know that she is incredibly strong in the bullet portion despite being slow in the earlier formats.
For sure. And one player who has accomplished a lot despite being the underdog was Teddy Coleman in the last year's edition. So we'll see if Alina can just make sure that her nerves don't get the best of her. We'll be right back shortly, and we'll come back to the bullet portion of this I'm Not GM Speed Chess Championship match. We'd just like to remind everybody that season 6 of Arena Kings is underway. It has already begun, and the events are on Mondays and Fridays. It's a lot of fun. You can play against people in your rating range, and also maybe have the chance to play against the likes of Hikaru Nakamura, Alireza Firouzja, Alexander Kostenyuk, and the one and only Prophet Danya Naroditsky. Aman and I, both enjoy those tournaments. Maybe you can beat up on us as well, but Aman, here we're focused on nothing except for the 1+1, the bullet portion of this match. It is all tied up. The momentum has certainly swung Lars Oscar Hauge's way. Alina Kashlinskaya, what in the world can she do as she's the underdog? And she must be frustrated after those last 4 games.
Yeah, I guess the break was kind of well timed before it got really out of hand, because it's very easy to lose 1, 2, 3, 4. And especially going into bullet, when you're on a losing streak, it can really be like 10 games in a row, just like that. So I think a break before the bullet is important. She can look at these tricky openings that Lars has been playing and say, look, I don't want to go into these in bullet. Imagine defending this position, Robert, in a bullet game. That would just be insanity. You can't be going into those. Let's see if she's changed things up and is really basically conscious about what opening she's going for. And Lars, we can see he's played bullet before, because look at what he's doing.
He looks like me out there, because this is what I play no matter what. I play the hippo style. You get your bishop staring at the center, the knight's in the center of the board here. But look at Alina. She's keeping pace, and that is essential. She has a better position, and she's doing well on the clock. So c5, d5, I think e5 is going to be played. And will we see that bishop end up trapped by its own pawns again? It looks like it. That dark sword bishop not very happy.
Yeah, this is a great game. So the thing is, a lot of times a player, let's say such as Alina, who generally gets low on time, what you'll see is that in a bullet game, they just go in with a mindset, hey, we can't take time in this format, not acceptable. And all of a sudden, they start to trust their instincts, and you realize as you're watching them, wait, she has really good instincts. She should do this more often. She is actually looking really comfortable in this bullet portion, which is why I was saying keep that in mind going into it. So right here, we see a great position for Alina, but typical fashion, Lars is messing things up.
Yeah, he is. He's just mixing it up here. He opens up the b file. He sacrifices a pawn. Queen takes b5. The queen comes to c6. That's important, as if the d file is opens up, the d6 pawn is under attack. But I think that Lars should be very happy at this point. And he goes queen a7. There's a rook on b8.
Taken d6, I would say.
Oh, that's a really nice tactical shot. So that would give her a quick attack on Black's king. And I think c4 here. Why not? c4, c3 even?
Like it. Takes, and playing rook a8, rook b8. You can't say that's going to be too bad as well.
Bishop c1, rook a8, rook b8, as you said. And then rook b3 was. I like that move.
So takes and knight a5. There's even b4 to consider.
Ooh, good eye by you there. And actually, the king can go to c2, and it's not 100% safe, but it's not getting checkmated.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable, actually.
And by the way, Alina is up on the clock here. Don't take on d5, because queen c4 would have pinned the knight. Instead, how does he get that pawn back?
He wants this and queen a2 check.
Okay.
And then queen c2, though.
Yeah.
And Alina's doing great here.
You have to trade queens, because after queen b4, rook b1, the knight on b6 is under attack twice.
But then queen c4?
And then take the knight?
Yeah, I think queen f1 was, let's say, overestimated, because everything is protected. Yeah, he's got to take that pawn, but this can't work out.
No, she can just play king e1. The knight on e4 is very powerful. It blocks that queen's axis in diagonal. You can play f3 if you need to, and queen b3 trade queens.
She sees queen b3. That's so important. Have to trade. d5 going to be attempted here, but knight c3, and there we go. Pick up that rook.
And you see him laugh, and then he laughed and then looked upset. I don't even know how he's feeling right now.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Now with the white pieces, he is opening with e4. He's opening with e4. He's just a happy chap there on the cam. Do you think he's going to be repeating that opening with Black, or is that an experiment, for game 1 of bullet, and he might adjust it going forward?
Well, it seems like he's been watching me stream, and that's a big mistake, because I always say, there's a disclaimer, do as I say, not as I do, and that opening is better. I think he should not go back to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does, just because he's used to that. And especially for players who play a lot of hyper bullet, you're just used to going. but there's increment here. It's not pure bullet. Alina's playing very quickly in this game as well, but I like. Oh wait, Let me take that back. I liked Lars's position until he hung the d4 pawn.
Yeah, there's got to be f6 now. It's the only move, followed by queen h4, something like that, like to just make things a little bit spicy.
Right, but after queen h4, there's knight f5. Oh, wait, there's a knight e3. Oh my gosh,
Whoa.
I think
what? Robert, you're leading them astray.
My bad. Maybe this isn't the end of the world though. Bishop g5. Now it is the end of the world.
That's the end of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna stop talking.
Yeah. So everything that you've said so far, unfortunately, has been heated advice. But no, all jokes aside, this is bullet. Totally different game, Robert. That f6 move, it might not work in the time controls we've seen before. But whoa, rook e4, back in the game is Alina.
And that's a Lars type of situation. You're down a piece, but you still keep your head on. Wait, wow. That's a really interesting choice. Decision. Yeah, knight takes f5. The f6 pawn is what you want to get at. If you could take that, the king is stuck on h8 checkmate. But b4.
Oh my gosh. I don't think knight h6 was the right move. Just bishop d4, keep the pressure.
Wait, but take a knight takes f6. Oh, then c takes b2. What a nice move.
Take b2 and promote.
I think that's what was overlooked by Lars because it looked like you're getting 2 rooks for queen. The king on h8 didn't look very safe. But look at this. You don't even have rook b6, which would have pinned the knight because the a7 pawn. The a7 pawn is the hero.
I like rook b7. He's trying to pin it, but it's just not working. Hang on. What's the move here?
Queen c2, I guess. Whoa. I don't like giving up that pawn. No, this is not. Yeah, this.
But hang on. Okay, black can't win this game now. No. Rook e2, knight g3.
Yeah, but even if you lose a rook for the knight, it's still going to be a draw.
It's true. Knight f2, you can play.
Wait. Knight f2, there might be some kind of smothered mate almost. Like, queen b6 coming. So you need to be careful.
Rook g3, super careful. Although, okay.
And rook g3, if the king goes to h8, it's rook f8 mate.
Wait, how do you get out of this? It's over.
You don't?
What in the
world? This game has been both players for the taking, and now finally Lars to just pick off that knight.
White wins this game for sure, or this game goes ages and ages and ages.
So it seems like it should just be a win for White. You can just slowly build up rook f3.
Because you can trade 2 rooks for the queen, and it should be winning. I'm not a fan of g3, maybe.
Though there are some positions where you give up the queen for the 2 rooks and still make a draw because of depending on where the pawns are. So king h6 is forced.
This looks scary.
There could be some stalemates. Wait, queen sack somewhere. Watch out for queen takes h4. Queen h4. Queen h4. Whatever.
Queen H4.
Just give your queen away.
Yeah.
There it is.
And then queen h2, queen h2.
playing for a win.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, actually, she can waste some time if she wants.
I don't know if that's part of the plan.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this is at least a draw now for sure.
Yes, and she can let Lars try to play on for a win, and then there could be something wrong.
She can play queen g2 anytime she wants, and it's a draw.
And this is why you always need to be careful about how many squares your opponent's king has, because Lars was trying to checkmate the king, and it would have been checkmate if he could land a check, but it was Alina's turn. She decided, let me give away my queen. No more moves for me.
And it's actually kind of funny that Alina played that whole game to the end without giving up the queen for nothing. You know what I mean? Like the chess player in me, the beautician in me has to give up my entire queen at the end to make the draw, but she's just checking as if it doesn't exist. Whereas we know that she saw it.
For sure. And well, she gets the white pieces again. Lars spent some time in the opening, which is strange. Honestly, on a second move, he spent a lot of time. So that's not good for bullet chess. You do get the increment. He can bounce back from that. But it's one of these positions where Alina proved like she knows what she's doing. And I think she just feels comfortable at the opening in this match.
Mm-hmm. Whoa, do not like c5 at all.
Yeah, not a fan.
Contrarily, I love the a pawn push because the knight gets into b5 long term, hits the a7 pawn. That's just something you always have to worry about.
Right. And the only downside could be is if the queens and the rooks get traded, then your a6 pawn can be picked off. But you're not going to trade all these pieces. There's too much left on the board. And the bishop stare down. Black doesn't really want to take and allow the queen into f5. So it's going to continue.
I like the idea of getting rid of that bishop, which makes knight b5 just sting that little bit more in general.
Right. And taking with the pawn on d4, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Why do you? Oh, because if she took with the knight, then she would have had double her pawns in the g file.
I also don't mind, taking those squares. I agree. It's not what I would first think of, but now that it's happened, I don't think it's the worst.
And now it looks like a French defense.
Right.
And here comes the queen to g6, and watch out for the king safety and knight b5. So white is playing on both sides of the board. Knight b5 may just win material at any moment to get to the c7 square, and queen g6, of course, is natural.
So there's knight f5 ideas just sort of looming.
There's rook c1, rook c2. Now the rook can go to g3 if the knight goes out of the way.
Queen d3. I was going to say, hang on, almost lost a knight there.
Right. So she's repeating. He never wants to repeat.
Yeah, just no.
He is the type of player, it seems that he's playing for a win every single game without fail. And that, of course, can backfire. But
what is the threat here? There's still nothing I see, like knight e2, knight f4, trying to bring more pieces, but I don't see any threat. Lars is just jumping around the board, taking the pawns.
He's doing a good job. And knight f4, knight g6, that's an idea.
There
knight
we go.
g6 for sure.
Yeah.
And how to follow? Well, I didn't like knight e5. I like sitting the knight on g6 and keeping it there.
Knight b5 into d6 may as well.
Yeah, interesting that knight b5 was not played. It also threatened the a7 pawn. Now knight b5 for sure.
Rook c2.
Ooh, quick counter shot. Great find there.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Rook takes b2.
Yeah. And knight a7, rook a2. So knight d6 was played. And 2 pawns down is Alina.
She does have good chances just because it feels like the king on h7 isn't completely safe. But knight takes e5, rook h8, king g6. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Nicely done. And look at all these white pieces on the last rank. Careful for rook check and knight f3 mate. There it is.
Double check, which is mate. Knight g4, knight f3. Good find by you. Great find by Lars. Really well done by him in that game. And now it's a tied match once more.
Yeah. And this is so exciting. I don't think that I've had the pleasure of commentating a match yet that we knew going into the bullet and has been proven in the bullet format to be neck and neck going to the finish. This might be decided, Robert, by like a single game with time expiring.
Yeah, we still do have just under 14 minutes left. Plenty of time for the players, even if they drop a game here, but you don't want to be down on the scoreboard. And right now, Alina goes back to this French. Lars says, don't mind if I do. I just was crushing you before I blundered my bishop on b4. Yeah. And it's the same exact line, and I don't think he will play queen e1 anymore.
Yeah, it's one of those things where your move wasn't so good, but it resulted in something great. So unfortunately, you have to switch it up, not them.
Right. And rook c8 played makes sense. Still no queen e1 because the d4 pawn is hanging. That sacrifice is possible with f6 at any moment, but you have to be certain. Otherwise, you actually open up the board for black's pieces, and that will backfire.
Yeah, and you can't get bishop d2 or anything, like queen d3 maybe for bishop d2. I feel like you want a complete development, but maybe h3, I would almost just play waiting move. He plays it again. That's hilarious.
I just don't believe in it. So let's pause for a second. Knight f5 was not a good move. Knight f5 is also not necessary, but the knight is under attack. So look at her go.
So many moves.
Knight g4. Okay,
understandable. So he wants to just play pawn takes pawn, it looks like.
So how about, no, rook g8, you just take pawn takes pawn. Wait,
pawn takes pawn and knight g5.
Oh, gosh.
That was the whole plan. Knight g5 is killer.
Too much to work out in a bullet game.
Oh, my goodness. He's going to play queen e1 nonstop, Robert. It's working.
It is working. It's working like a charm, but it shouldn't work. And I feel convinced, because the threat was pawn takes f6, maybe some kind of like rook c4 move. I've been thinking about this. Pinning that knight so that you could take back on f6. Something like that. It just doesn't feel like it should be enough for white. You're only attacking with a couple pieces. So if Alina is able to figure that out, then she will turn this to her advantage. But right now, this is Lars' game.
I think you can, I was going to say, knight g5 is just waiting to happen. Knight g5 takes, and like rook takes f7 also looks pretty good. Yeah, rook f7 is a threat, and queen takes g8.
Oh, queen takes g8 and a new queen. That hurts. That really hurts.
Yeah. And f7 is hanging as well, so this will probably be resigned. There it is. And Lars, he's making these attacks work, Robert. He's getting, he's mixing things up. He's getting spicy positions that objectively, as soon as he plays Queen E1, you see that eval bar just
Whoa,
go.
what is this?
I think that was a mouse slip. I think he wanted F5, E6,
Okay,
F5.
okay. It makes sense. Yeah, now he plays F5. Because you don't win a game, take the lead, and then do this. You are either down 4 points and are just tilted, or you're up a ton and do whatever. That was definitely a mouse slip.
Yeah.
And it's not that bad.
It's not that bad now because the knight gets to F5 and it's actually like very okay.
Wow. I wish I could make mouse slips like that and not have to pay any sort of price.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
what the heck just happened? I don't know how that worked out, but I saw the webcam when Lars played F6 and he gave the face like, that was a mouse slip. So I think it was, but he can't be complaining here.
Although, where's his king going? Because bishop d3, the g6 pawn is weak. So he plays 97. He's going to try to castle queenside. That takes way too much time, though, I feel like.
Yeah, he's going bishop c6, queen d7, and well, he's actually, or queen d6, he's actually going to get it.
But then c5, b4, b5.
Oh, take c4, take c4. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, wait, taking c4 would have been good.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at this, though. The rook on h2 will swing over to the queen side and help with the attack.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
no.
Oh, no, not again. Not again. My eyes.
Trauma.
Take me eyes, but not me bishop. No, that bishop on a8 is just, oh, gosh.
Is he going to win another game with basically a piece that doesn't exist?
He could, because a5, if you take en passant, you lose the c6 pawn. And, well, if you don't take,
no,
she's
attack. Not taking that. She's not taking that.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. I mean, black's not even worse anymore.
How is black like better? What?
Oh, gosh. Okay, then g5 scores. Wait, e3?
Hello?
Oh, gosh. Oh, no.
Oh, my goodness.
Maybe knight c3 to e4?
He's giving peace odds.
Yeah. Which gives her a chance, actually, as this game continues. Well, no, that pawn's important.
Oh, my goodness.
That pawn's real important.
Uh-oh. Queen e5. Queen e5 hurts. Rook f8.
Queen e5 actually doesn't have a mating threat yet, though. But queen f5 check picks up the bishop. But queen a1 just king c2. Yeah,
and he sees that immediately.
I would resign. So, ASAP doesn't even cover how quickly I resign. You need to resign.
G6? Queen g6 and rook g8.
I'm not mistaken, Amon. Wouldn't you resign too? Just you need to get the next game going.
I probably wouldn't resign this because I would rationalize that material's even because there's a bishop on e8.
I see the evaluation bar. It's not that bad for white. How is this possible?
This is what I wanted. If you put the rook on g8 and then you just bring the knight in. Bring the knight.
Oh my gosh! If you can bring that knight over there, like knight
d7.
Exactly, knight d7 is winning. So knight a6, knight c2, knight b4, knight a6. Oh my gosh, it's winning for white.
Oh no, bishop d4.
No, but then just take the pawn, and then you have. Don't take the bishop. Don't take the bishop. Don't take the bishop.
Yes.
Don't take it.
She's not taking it. That's beautiful.
Oh my gosh, she's not taking the bishop, and she didn't resign, and it's paying off.
Wait, she's not taking anything.
She's winning.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my, what?
The hell is going on here?
Yeah, what is happening? Wait, black's getting out of this. Wait, no, you have the rook. Oh my gosh, she hung the rook.
Wait a minute. We've seen this before. She literally lost a rook to the bishop that was trapped. That's the second time this match that the trapped bishop has somehow come out of nowhere, Robert, and taken her rook.
That is...
What the hell?
That's just devastating. And we have this line that I don't understand again. I can't breathe. I'm seriously in pain.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh, this just hurts.
Okay, let's talk about one thing positive in the Alina camp. She looked at this line 1,000%.
Yes.
She's playing a very good, I would say close to refutation. Queen e7, queen b4 check. And she is so ready for this. I can tell that she looked at this after the break from the 3-minute.
Yeah, and now she's up a pawn, and there's no attack, and it's white's king that's being attacked. Bishop f5 will just win next move, and then knight b4.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is looking fantastic.
So how to win this game? It feels like there's a win in like 2 moves.
Yeah, A4 looks quite good as well.
Knight
Knight
A5.
A1.
Knight
What's with
A5.
Lars and pieces in the corner, Robert? Bishops, knights, it doesn't matter with him.
Yeah, he's just, I don't even know how to explain it, but he's throwing those pieces left and right. And
Take and rook D4.
oh, she's going to C6 B5. The bishop's trapped. And at B5, rook takes D3. And then rook D8, something like that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is a reasonable move, but maybe, is it G4? No, not quite.
No, King C1, that's a good move. Just avoiding the pin.
Yeah. And now F3?
F3 looks good. You can't take on C5 because your knight gets pinned. So, unless I don't think you can. Although maybe you can.
Knight C5, and I guess there's back rank issues, though.
Yeah.
Now, although black's up a pawn, I think you'd agree.
Knight C6.
Yeah, you got to be so careful here. Tactics. Rook takes D5.
Oh, knight E7 check. Rook D. Oh my god.
Knight E7 check first. Oh, it had to be rook C8 there.
Yeah. No, Alina, she needs to resign. Now she needs to resign.
Now I agree. Resign
because you're going to be down 3 points.
You
need to start the final game before the clock hits 0. So if you win 2 games here, she will have a chance to come back. So of course,
it
winning
has to
those
be a
games
quick win. Has to be a very, very quick win here from Alina. Like, not winning that game is so bad for the match, because that was the position that was like she did her homework. She came prepared for that same line that Lars brought to the table, and not winning that game has got to hurt her mental. She has to win like a very quick game right now.
Yeah, and Lars goes on these streaks. Remember, he was down 4 points, then he won 4 in a row. Then he lost an early bullet game, and now he's won 3 or 4 in a row even. Like losing track of the numbers. But yeah, now his position, he has a monster center with these 3 pawns here, and now they're going forward. So the way this can backfire is if white can open up the board, and that's a good way, bishop c4 check kind of ideas. Or actually, knight takes e4, queen d5 check is possible as well. But the point is that the king on g8 isn't actually that safe over there.
Mm-hmm. Just take that and some sort of check.
Or maybe
knight e4, knight d to e4.
I love knight d to e4. Protects the e3 pawn, hits the g4 knight, hits the d6 bishop.
It literally hits everything in the position.
And she didn't. Queen takes g2. There's
G2.
bishop e6 check to throw in, perhaps. And then rook f1 kind of thing. Yeah, I'm not a wait. Queen g2.
Queen g2, rook f1, e4.
d6 hangs, but white's king is in big trouble.
Yeah, knight b4, by the way, to knight c2 or knight d3 is also pretty crushing.
Queen f2.
Queen f2, game over. Rook d8 or queen takes g1. Ouch. Ouch. That might be the dagger right there. 3 minutes left in this match, more or less. I think it's pretty much impossible that Alina makes a comeback now, Robert.
No, and I mean, what a comeback from Lars. Down 4 points, looking like everything is going Alina's way, and then he just goes on a winning spree and doesn't stop, because he went from -4 to +4. That's an 8-point swing. And it's a weird match, because if you told me just by looking at the games that somebody is winning this match by 4 points, I don't think I would think it was Lars.
Yeah, like you'd assume that eventually all the good positions that Alina was getting all match would finally result in it going in her direction. And g5 is going to be taken, no calculation needed, and this rook e3, queen h6, this is over. This has got to be over. Yeah.
And now it's just, adding insult to injury at this point. Just you're already wounded. You've lost this match that was going your way, and now your king is blasted open on move 15.
This is resignable, basically. Rook g3 check. Knight takes e5. You can just take that back first. Yeah, nothing to do here.
It's
queen g5 check.
This is one of those moments where, okay, this match can end now. It feels like it's time. I'm over this.
Yep. And time ticks down, but there's just no resources here, unfortunately. g5, she kind of forgot, I guess, that the queen was on d2. Often the queen is not on d2, it's on e2, but that's an easy sacrifice to make. Rook g3. That's going to be it.
Yep.
And might get one more game here.
Yeah, we do get one more. So probably not another game that Alina wants to play, but there's still time left on the clock. and we have a Budapest. So that's
Hmm.
always fun. And that has been a good thing in this match. We've seen a different opening most games, and this is tricky. White is up a pawn, but black has quick play, and now the e5 pawn is under attack. But she seems to know this. Queen d5 is the principal move. Well, it's not really principal, it's the good move, but it's hard to play to bring your queen out into the center like this.
Hmm. And d6 played, I think usually they go f6 there, but d6 looks a little bit worse to my eyes. White's just going to finish that development, and kind of looks super solid here actually for Alina.
Right. And it's sort of, in a sense, kind of like an Orthoschnat reversed, where
Yeah.
it's an extra pawn for white, but the black is really going full steam ahead trying to create some play, but you're not in time, I don't think.
No, bishop d3 looks super strong, and a3 even here. Yeah, just not dealing with knight b4. G5 is usually what black wants to throw in, but now I'm not sure it works because you're actually in a pin.
Right. And I will add that bishop a5 by black was a really clever move, trying to get knight b4. Hope that you're not looking for it. But of
Hmm.
course, a3 was the easy response. And now white's up a pawn. You've castled. You should be able to take advantage here, but you also don't have that much time. And the match is officially over after this game. And the
Right.
position, maybe not that bad for black because of white's double isolated c pawns.
Yeah, knight e5, b6, and you can sort of play around the extra pawn that Alina has, which is pretty much the whole point of this opening. So it's very very in line with what to expect.
And it went from tactical to incredibly positional.
Yeah.
I didn't think the game would take this turn here, but now c4 falls, and black must be thrilled about the position. The a3 pawn
A3.
hangs with a fork.
And let's just say Alina will be not disappointed to get out of this match
Yes, when it
at this
rains,
point.
it is just absolutely pouring.
Yeah, and I mentioned that this is how bullet can go sometimes, Robert. You lose one, you lose two, you might be a streak, but in bullet, it can turn into 10 games just like that. So Lars with an incredible streak in the bullet portion, and that was just, alone. That's what won him the match, plain and simple, Robert.
Yeah, he was able to fend off some horrible positions, and he fought tooth and nail. That kind of defensive resourcefulness should be praised. We're going to take a quick break because when we return, we'll be joined by the players. We'll get to hear their thoughts on what was an exhilarating matchup between two very strong competitors. We shall be right back. And we return with the players. Alina, our apologies that the match did not go your way, and congratulations to you, Lars. And we'll start with you, Lars. I mean, what happened there? How were you able to turn it around? You were down by 4 points in the match. What did you tell yourself? What did you change?
Yeah, at some point it was looking really grim. But I kind of had the same idea or plan towards the whole match, which was just that I was going to try to win every game. So the plan itself didn't change, but it was looking pretty hard at some point there because in like the last 5 minute games and the two first 3 minute games, I got crushed really. I mean, I lost like two drawn in games as well because I was trying to like press on time. But after that, I kept winning bad positions, and then like everything went my way. Like except the openings, like I was losing after almost like 15 moves every game. But it went really well after the openings in the last games.
Yeah, that's we thought maybe I was going to mention one of the openings that you chose in particular that worked really well the first time you tried it, which was the ortho schnapp that you brought out. And credit to Alina because it looked like did you check that, Alina, in the break after the 3 minute? Because he played it again in bullet and it looked like you came with almost a refutation.
No, I didn't check the opening. I was happy with what I was getting after the openings. The problem was not in this part of the game, but somehow I couldn't convert my winning positions. I mean, and of course, congratulations to Lars for fighting so hard. And I mean, yeah, I mean, especially that game when I was piece up and I lost it on time. I mean, that was horrible from my side.
Yeah, and Alina, at what point did you feel like the match was slipping? Because you had the 4 point lead and it seemed like you were getting great positions. And when it happens one time, maybe you can forget about it. But was it the second, the third time? When did you really feel like things just were falling apart?
I felt bad when I lost the fourth game in a row because it reminded me of the match against John Bartholomew last year when I lost 6 games in a row. Somehow I should work on this, not losing, like, stop at some point, because I think in the third game I lost, I could, after rook takes e3, I could just go for a draw, and I don't know why, I started to blunder everything. And yeah, at that point I thought that I'm in trouble, but then in 1+1, I thought it was back in the game, but again, I started to blunder at some point and I couldn't stop. That was a problem.
Yeah, the blunders obviously they're hard to avoid, and there are plenty. I mean, Lars, I have to ask you because it seemed like a theme in this match. You had a bishop trapped on A8, trapped on H8. I mean, it's like you were addicted to these. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's like something that usually never happens, and then I got it like twice in this match, twice or 3 times. And like the first time, I just blundered it, but the time when I got the bishop on A8, it was kind of intentional, but it didn't really work out because I have no idea how that position was like when the rook was on G8, like the end game after I exchanged queens.
Yeah, Robert and I were actually having a crazy time analyzing that and watching it happen because, believe it or not, Alina played that to a point where it was actually winning for white at many, many points in that endgame, and obviously just dropping the rook was the difference. But I think that position was actually better for white, surprisingly.
Yeah, at the end I thought so too, but like before I blundered like the A pawn, I thought like I should, like I have 3 passed pawns. And I have like the idea to take on C6 to get another one. But yeah, that position was really crazy. And like I'm a piece and a couple of pawns up, and it's still like super hard for me in the end game.
Yeah.
Well, I know it's getting late for you both, but Lars, one last question. You will face the winner of Teddy Coleman and Carissa Yip. What do you feel like you need to change so that you can keep winning and moving on in this tournament?
Probably the openings. The openings went very poorly this match. And maybe I've blundered a bit too much, but I think mainly the openings. So I should just find something that I'll play every game instead of like switching between opening lines that I don't know.
For sure, that makes sense. Well, Alina, again, our apologies. The match didn't go your way, but you have so many fans out there who are rooting you on.
Yeah.
So you should hang your head high and be very proud. And we're happy that you participate in this event.
Thank you.
And good luck
And
to you.
good luck for Lars in the following matches, of course. I'll be rooting
thank
for
you.
you.
Thank you.
Well, here you heard their thoughts. Lars, going forward, maybe he needs to fix something in the opening and maybe stick to an opening. That's interesting. And he will await the winner of Teddy Coleman and Carissa Yip down in the bottom right-hand side of the bracket. So, Aman, as you look at the bracket, I mean, we still have three first-round matchups to go. And I don't even know what to think right now after that fun match.
That was awesome. And I said it right at the beginning that maybe some people on Twitch aren't as familiar with the two competitors today. But in my opinion, we've had some crazy ones. Danny versus Lawrence. We've had Levy Brosman, tons and tons of fans on Twitch. But I actually thought that this was seriously the most entertaining match that we got to witness and commented on. And people got to see the personalities of the players as well. I think Alina, not only did she start with a lot of fans, as you mentioned, but probably collected a few more with an ever gracious post-game interview there, wishing her competitor good luck in the future rounds and actually cheering for him to win the whole thing so that she can say, yeah, I just lost to the winner.
Second year in a row that would be the case if Lars is able to move on and win this whole thing. And I just wanted to state that match score is very misleading. I mean, it looks like a lopsided affair. It looks like Lars was just storming through and crushing the match. But no, of course, if you go back through it, there are many moments that both players wish they could take back. And I really just was impressed. I know I sound like I was being a little bit harsh about Lars's play, but the ability to not lose these completely losing positions, that is a talent in and of itself. And I don't say that lightly. That is something you see some of the best players in the world do. Even the players at the very top, sometimes Hikaru Nakamura gets a horrible position and all of a sudden, wait, still fighting. Wait a second, he's turned this around and he's winning the game. So that kind of skill is absolutely essential in a several hours long match.
Yep, that's a great point. Now the clock is part of the match, and there's always a best move to be found, no matter if it's a good position for you or a bad position. So full credit to Lars, and I think Alina realized that as well, giving full credit to him for being so resilient and not being too frustrated. Like, oh man, you played like trash. You were losing every game. No, we didn't see that attitude at all. It was more like, wow, that was actually very impressive defense by Lars. So if he gets some better opening positions, that when he has those bad games, he can come back the way that he did in this match. But to get them less often, to give himself a better chance, could definitely be a front runner for potentially the finals in this tournament if he keeps that up.
Yeah, especially if he plays the way he did in those first two games of the match, and then in the bullet portion, I would say that was Lars in full force, and the Orthoschnapp game. Can't forget about that success.
That was his best one. That was his best.
For sure. Well, on that note, the match has come to its conclusion. We want to just remind everybody that there will be so many more fun events upcoming. Arena Kings is in full swing. We will also have PogChamps 3 starting in February. Not all of the players are known yet. There still are a few names to be announced, but just the players we have ensure that it will be a great one. Aman, hey man, I have so much fun commentating these matches for you. This was the most fun I've had yet.
Yeah, and we're getting lucky because not only is it a good time anyway, but the matches that we've got to commentate have had evaluation bars that are basically doing push-ups the entire time. I mean, up, down, you name it. The matches have been exciting. They have been very close, even though the final score never seems to reflect that. Someone always runs away with it at the end. But all the matches that we've commentated have been exciting. There's just enough high-level play and then just enough blunders that it's the best of both worlds. So it's been a pleasure commentating alongside you, Robert. And of course, we'll be back for many more of these.
For sure. And I just want to say, while the players, they showed their nerves of steel in this match, particularly Lars, Tata Steel resumes tomorrow. You will not want to miss the world's absolute best players taking on each other head-to-head matchups in classical time controls. Danya Naroditsky and Fiona Stelantoni will have the call. It's going to be another good one. So for now, keep enjoying chess. Enjoy the rest of your days, but don't forget to tune back in for that tournament once again tomorrow. See you, everybody.